for Manhattan Community Board 1. I'm joined here by Wendy Chapman, our co-chair, and Diana Sweetide, the Director of Land Use and Planning at Community Board 1, and all of our wonderful board members and presenters who you can see up there on the panelists. So anyway, we're going to start with the Hudson River Park Estuary Sanctuary Management Plan presentation. This is something that you might recall we looked at in the committee last year. I think I guess it was 2019. I've lost track of time. I thought maybe it was last year. In any case, prior to the pandemic. There are some changes, and I'm going to ask after the presentation for people to feel free to ask a bunch of questions. I'm also going to ask Graham Birchall, who's the president of the DAG, who is on the technical advisory board of HRPT about this plan, to just give us a few words. So I guess we can start whenever the HRPT team is ready, and that
Can you all see that all right?
Great.
Looks good.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, well, I'm going to jump in. This is Nicolette Witcher from Hudson River Park, and then Tina and I are going to kind of tag team along the way. I did get the heads up that you guys have a really packed agenda, so we had kind of a longer slideshow prepared, but I think we're going to kind of skim through some of the slides in the interest of time. I know that there's some interest in the water use map in particular, so we can spend a few extra minutes on that. And then, of course, if there's any particular questions, we'll just do it that way. So we're going to go fairly fast over these first few slides, and then we'll let you guys ask us if there's any particular area that you have further questions on. So the biggest thing we really wanted to do is come here today and let you know that as of May 27th, we finally began the public comment period for Hudson River Park's Estuarine Sanctuary Management Plan. That is a mouthful, as I caught Alice trying to say it a couple times, and even I struggle. So we're going to call it ESMP, or the park plan from now on. But essentially, it's this foundational management document that really guides the trust and all our partners, like our boating partners. And it really creates this framework for managing all these many, many uses that we have in our waters, right? We have non-motorized boating, environmental education, research, restoration, commercial uses, etc. So when the park was first created over 20 years ago, this was a requirement that we created this plan. Tina, you can just go to the next slide. So you know about the Estuarine Sanctuary, the 400 acres, and now you've just heard me say that this requirement to have this plan comes from the Act, and it really provides, as I just mentioned, this balance of marine resources and habitat, and public recreation, commercial uses, and everything, and it allows us to really organize and be, thoughtful in how we put everything together and how our partners can really build and we can have a very dynamic park environment. Next slide. So, when we first started this process over 20 years ago, the park wasn't built and we weren't park managers, and we were really just, the Hudson River Park was in its infancy. And there were a lot of things we weren't even talking about back then, like climate change and equity and resiliency. So we've done a lot since 2002, and we're really excited to launch this 2021-2030 action agenda, which will really help guide us for the next decade. So Tina, you want to cover the highlights?
Sure. So then just to walk you through this updated ESMP, again, we started with that 2002 document as our base and updated it from there. It's organized into 3 primary management areas: environmental education, public access and resource management, and research and habitat enhancement. It was drafted in collaboration with the DEC and members of our technical advisory committee. These are individuals that are experts in their areas and field that really helped us put our finger on how are we making this document relevant and up to date. So on this next slide, you'll see a sample of what this action agenda looks like. This is really the meat and potatoes of this document. So every section starts with a lofty vision statement. This is forward thinking. This is very big picture and actionable, followed by what we're calling kind of an elevator pitch to kind of just give you context of the importance of each management area in the document. Then from there, it goes into our main goals. These are meant to really stand the test of time and again, really start to hone in how we're going to achieve that vision, followed by actions and projects. So in creating these really large buckets, such as programming or completing the park, there's a lot of smaller steps that need to happen. So actions and projects really become those pieces that are going to help us achieve the goals over time. And so just to give you a quick sense of what some of these are, this is our environmental education vision. I won't read it right now, but you'll see really for us, it's all about creating and expanding access and connecting others to the Hudson River. Our overarching themes kind of throughout that section really is about fostering estuary education and STEM learning. In the past number of years, we've also put a really large focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our programs. That's both through what we're teaching, the internships we're providing, and the job training to young professionals. Also, participatory science, really taking research and making it accessible and part of the community is key. Promoting sustainable behaviors. So not just having those sustainable actions promoted in the park, but teaching people what the importance of them. And then of course, cultivating partnerships. In terms of research and habitat enhancement, this is an area where we foresee the most growth to happen, as well as one that we've really been excited in recent years to increase the number of research projects we have going on in the park. So just some of those big picture goals and actions. Really, we plan for this to be one of the major areas in the next 10 years of this document where we're focusing a lot of energy and effort. And we're recognizing that research is what's needed to understand how the sanctuary is doing. So understanding this need for a baseline is really important. And of course, monitoring and research is really what's going to inform what we call our adaptive management approach for creating habitat enhancement projects, areas such as the Gansevoort shoreline. And then, of course, collaboration, working with local institutions, that's key to how we do a lot of our work. So inviting and promoting scientists and their work within the sanctuary, and of course, making data accessible. Then in terms of public access and resource management, this is probably the area where from the 2002 document to present, we had made the most progress, and that's shared in the first part of the document, our progress report. But they're looking ahead to the next 10 years. We want to complete Hudson River Park. That's number one. We want to complete that physical and visual access of the park itself. And then along with that, it kind of shifts more to that resource management. So protecting the sanctuary, managing the sanctuary, providing that safe boating access and safe access to recreate, working with tenants and partners to really create that connection to the sanctuary. And then of course, sustainability falls in this arm too. And that's another one that we really built out from the original 2002 document. And so within public access falls the water use map, which I'm going to turn it back over to Nicolette for.
Yeah, so we're just highlighting this because I heard that there may be some questions about it. But really, there's not that much that we've changed. I don't know if there was some confusion. I've heard some conflicting kind of, no one's really come to us directly, but I just heard a couple of things. So I just was actually hoping to clear up any potential misunderstanding or just to clarify the fact that this water use map, I think sometimes it's referred to as water use zones. This is not zoning. This is not ULURP. This is just in the Hudson River Park Act, they use the phrase zone. So if you hear zoning, don't think of something official through city planning like a ULURP process. That's a much more formal thing. So in the act itself, it allows us to create these zones within the water, really in order to just help promote public safety, right? So to cluster certain things, if we know for whatever reason, sometimes historic reasons, we have boathouses, we have the River Project and Downtown Boathouse, for example, have historically been in the Pier 26 area. Well, it makes sense to cluster non-motorized boating there, for example. So these uses have arisen for a number of reasons, have been focused in these certain areas. So historically, so back in 2002, when the original ESMP did first come out, there was a water use map, water use zones that were created. They were basically divided into 4 areas: a water play area, which, as it makes sense, small non-motorized boats, some support vessels or whatnot. But in general, this was for where we wanted to really promote that non-motorized boating area. Motorized area for everything like the water taxis and historic vessels that were under motor power. And I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, Tina. Can you go to the next slide, Tina? Okay. A reserve area, which is actually specifically carved out that we really should prioritize some area for marine habitat preservation and enhancement and education and research. But always noting, by the way, that non-motorized boating is pretty much compatible with this, unless there's a really explicit reason why, if there's some unique research project that would require, you know, a carved out area. But in general, we see complete compatibility with non-motorized boating and the reserve area. And then there's always been some kind of restricted area. In the past, it was called economic development, but really restricted for a number of reasons, right? The passenger use terminals, they're out of our domain, for example. So whether we have a commercial lease like with Con Ed, where they have water rights around the perimeter of their area, or whether there's a municipal use like the waste transfer station, you know, and the northern boundary of the park, where we just don't want, you know, the public to go, and it's just not safe, or even a little carve out around the heliport, right around the boundary of the heliport, where it just doesn't make sense to have a kayak go right up to the helipad. So we've carved out a few restricted areas, pretty much consistent to where it was in 2002, but we've made just a few changes, like around the Holland Tunnel air shaft. You know, it's always been a restricted area, but it wasn't specifically delineated in the 2002 map. So Tina, if you go to the next slide. So just to give you an example of what we're looking at from 2002, this was a graphic. The one on the left is a graphic we pulled right up from the website. It's a little bit more artsy. It's from our graphic designer. The one on the right with all the color blocks is what was in the original 2002 document. And I'm just going to refer to the color block version because I think it's easier to describe. It essentially says the same thing, but one has these lines and these pictures, and there's a key which isn't necessarily here, and the other one just has the color blocks. So historically, it was a motorized zone below Pier 26, and between the north side of Pier 26 and Vestry Street was a water play area, and then north of Vestry Street to about 34th Street, the Holland Tunnel was this reserve area. So again, we wanted an area where we were prioritizing habitat restoration, but not excluding non-motorized boating. And then you can just see it repeating. I'll focus on the Tribeca area for the interest of time, right? So then if you can flip to the next slide, Tina, you'll really, so this is the proposed map. So if you look on the left, that's the Tribeca section, which we can focus on for the purpose of this conversation. We just added a few more details. We added the mooring field. We added all the street names so you could get your bearings. We added some water use, some buildings that were relevant for the water, like the future estuarium, and then the boathouses and the tide deck and where the historic vessels go. We also have a little fish icon for where there could be any type of research or habitat enhancement. So there is, as you know, I think Carrie came to you in September to do a presentation on the Tribeca habitat enhancement. So that's just, we have a little fish icon throughout where there's any type of restoration, even if it's just like a reef ball on the bottom of the riverbed. But, you know, there's really no rezoning here, as you can see. You know, the motorized area goes to the south side of Pier 26. The water play area goes from the north side of Pier 26 up to about Vestry Street. And the reserve area goes from about Vestry north to 34. We carved ourselves a little restricted zone around the Holland Tunnel just because we've had so many experiences with Homeland Security, and that's it. Not, but just that they really protect that site. So we just figured it made sense to let everyone know. And that's kind of, I mean, I'm going to kind of stop there. I think if anything, we've gone, the language is even more accommodating to allow kayakers in the reserve zone. It explicitly in the document, as you can read, says that kayaking and non-motorized boating is permitted in the light green areas unless there's some specific carve out for some reason, you know, unless we have a specific sign. I could imagine if something in the future, there's some kind of hydrologic study that needs to have a little zone, we would mark it off and then you'd have to avoid it for a little while. But we don't foresee that happening too often because we see the two uses quite compatible. So with that, I'll pause. Oh, just real quick to highlight, we're right in the middle of our public process. It runs through August 9th. Our public hearing is next week, Tuesday, the 29th from 4:30 to 6:30. It is virtual. You can go on the website to get the login information, and also on the websites, the new documents, the proposed document, as well as the historic documents and the notice and everything. So thank you very much. And we hope to see you at the hearing or receive any of your comments. And of course, we'll take any questions you may have.
Nicolette and Tina, thanks very, very much. I appreciate the brevity. Obviously, we do have a full agenda. I also want to introduce Paul Goldstein, who's the chair of our Waterfront and Parks Committee, where this is a joint committee review. Because of the August 9th date for comment, we will be either sending a letter or writing any comments that we believe the board might be helpful a little later, so we don't have to have that completely shored up tonight. I'm going to now pass this on to Graham Burchell, as I mentioned, the president of the Downtown Boathouse, just who is on your technical advisory board. If he had some specific comments that I think you were addressing about the abatement at Pier 26 and the quote unquote rezoning. So Graham, do you want to take a minute to ask any questions or provide to the committee information that you feel is important? Thanks.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, Graham Birchall here, President, Downtown Boathouse. And so I've looked at these maps and also the zoning wording, and the Downtown Boathouse has been using the whole of the Pier 26 abatement for recreation to run a free kayaking program since before the park was created. And the 2002 map shows all of the embayment for that use. Now the wording is a little different, but the map shows that, which you presented. But the 2021 map, of course, shows that most of the embayment would not be for recreational use. The other significant change is that there is no reference to motorized boating in the water play areas in the 2002 document, and yet there's a lot of wording to motorized boating in the water play areas in the 2021 document. We don't see that as an improvement at all. We find that completely incompatible. It's always been okay for the occasional use of motorboats to support like swim operations and things like that, but there was no need to add particular reference like to motorized fishing, right, in the water play areas. It just isn't contributing at all. So this is the only access point to the harbor for the 500,000 people of Lower Manhattan, right? And you can't run the scope of use for the residents of Lower Manhattan that is currently there if you're confined to the space that is shown in the new map. It's incompatible. So that's the major comment.
Okay, thanks very much, Graham. Do you want to respond to that, Nicolette or Tina?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide a quick response or to follow up and follow up as needed. So I guess we're just going to agree to disagree on the graphic of the 2002 map. I'm looking at it very clearly. The water play area was always to Vestry Street. I'm not really sure where the confusion is, but I just want to say we absolutely love Graham's program, and Graham, I think you're great too, and so I love what you do, and I love your dedication to non-motorized boating, and you know I do. And we've had many conversations about this. The park, I mean, the essence of the park is just like non-motorized boating is a key feature to the essence of the park, and we don't want to see it minimized. And we have a third of the document dedicated to the fact that we want to continue to promote it and help it and partner with Graham and his colleagues the greatest extent we can. So I certainly hope we can figure out a way to make this comfortable for everyone, because we absolutely want nothing but programs like Graham's in particular, which is just phenomenal, to flourish. We haven't changed the boundary and don't intend to change the boundary of the water play and reserve area in that section. The going past the explicit water play area into the reserve area has always been acceptable to us and will continue to be acceptable to us, provided unless there is in the future a really essential key, habitat project or something, just like it always has been. But even with the Tribeca enhancement, we actually changed that. We tweaked that a little, that restoration project, to make sure we could balance both uses. So I really do hope this is just something, a little kind of misunderstanding that we can sort out. As far as the motorized, non-motorized thing, we actually got feedback to just put that motorized. It was more for support vessels for like the swimmers, for example. Sometimes the swimmers or others, they needed a little small motorized support vessel. We're not like, we could even tweak that language a little bit. It's pretty, it was really intended to just be in there to support, but the idea was always the priority was non-motorized vessels. So I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit, and I'm glad to go into more detail with any of you at a later time.
Thanks very much. It would be helpful to probably have the detail at some point noted in a document and this exchange to continue. I think it's critical, and I think the community board has always landed very much on the side of the trust and its non-motorized uses, particularly at the kayak station at the boathouse. So I'm going to open this up to committee members at this point with comments or questions. Please try to remember that we have a very long agenda ahead. Thanks. Anybody?
Yeah, I had my hand up.
Thanks, Paul.
Just a very quick follow-up on the downtown boathouse. So do you anticipate that any of these other measures that you're beginning to take to better preserve the estuary and perhaps create other boating activities? The question is, will the boathouse need to change their mode of operation in any way, shape, or form, or do you anticipate they could just continue to operate in the manner that they've been doing for many years?
Yeah, it is our full expectation that they could continue to operate in the manner they've been doing, maybe even grow some if we're able to do that. I don't know. They have such a prolific, they have so many people coming. I don't even know how they could get any larger, but no, I don't expect anything in the future to impede what they're doing. We love what they're doing, and we want them to keep doing more of it.
Great. As you know, this community board has long supported the estuary, and the river project started all that. And
yes,
it'd be great if you could find the proper balance there to try to keep some of these existing programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. I see Wendy Chapman, our co-chair.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation. One of the things I read in the document is, all the things you've had to do since Hurricane Sandy happened. Obviously, it costs a lot of money after Sandy hit, and I know you've been putting more native plants in and that type of thing. But Alice and I and the committee spend a lot of time on resiliency issues, and I know, as you know, that the North Battery Park project is going to be coming up your way. Can you talk a little bit more about that piece of it? I know you emphasize that funding is a big issue, and you don't have money or a plan right now. So I'm curious about anything we don't know. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing that I think you don't know. We have been historically, we're involved in a lot of those conversations. When the beginning of the conversations were right after Sandy, and the battery project was first being conceived, and the state came to us, or the city came to us, or the big U team came to us, and they all tried to say, like, well, what could we do here? And no one could quite figure out what to do. No one, meaning at a city, state, or even federal level. And it was always kind of viewed that really at the end of the day, the park was probably, for good or for bad, the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, to save the city. And if it came down to it, I don't know that they were going to put a tremendous amount of resources to try to save these public piers per se. But none of that's formalized or in writing. It's just we were part of many conversations over the years that didn't really materialize into, a strategic plan for the park itself, in terms of resiliency per se, to completely, save all the park features. Now, have we been building more resilient? Absolutely. We have tried to take all the lessons we've learned and to modify our building accordingly. The future estuarium will be significantly elevated. There really won't even be a first floor. It'll be on stilts practically, if it ever, however the design comes about. But just conceptually, because of the new laws and we're trying to build much more sustainably, and there's really nothing else that you wouldn't have already heard of. It's not like we have a real articulated plan to do anything other than that.
And are you advocating at all in terms of in terms of this? I know that obviously we have an election coming up, but I really feel like you should be helping us advocate as to what needs to be done, because there's, as you know, there's no money, no plan for that part of Northern Tribeca all the way up, and we feel like there should be one. So I don't know if you want to advocate, or if you feel like that's not your role. I'm not sure.
I mean, I can see your point, but it's been the type of, we've always been very, we've always come to the table when asked to come to the table. We are a park, and we've tried to, understand our role versus, the homes and the businesses just on the other side of the West Side Highway. I'm not saying we wouldn't be part of an advocacy voice. It's just, I think we would be just a certain part of that. I don't know, coming at it as the, I think it would be a more kind of strategic conversation you would need to have with Noreen, in terms of, an agency approach to this. But yeah, I mean, it's complicated because of who we are and this kind of small piece we play in, the fact that there isn't that economic, it's a different kind of role.
Fair enough. That's why I wanted to ask the question, just so we understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. It's a critical role, and we will look forward to continuing with Noreen on that critical role and how it'll get implemented. Thanks. Richard Corman, who I'm happy to introduce now as a full board member, who's been a public member, and we are delighted. So former River Project fame and other incredibly important aspects of our Lower Manhattan community. Go ahead, Richard. Thanks. Well, with that introduction, I'm not sure he's there. Richard, are you on? You may get, well, you're being
one must
unmute.
And I thank you, Alice, for that too kind introduction. Really appreciate the welcome. A couple of things. First of all, great to see you, Nicolette and Tina. Lovely to see you both here, and thank you for the presentation. I want to first say that I know from the discussions at the TAC and with the Hudson River Park Trust that a number of the issues related to research and education were raised and addressed in the ESMP. And I, for one, having been involved with the River Project, greatly appreciate that. And I'm certainly hoping and expecting, given today's conversation, that you'll be able to do the same with Graham and address the issues that he's raising today. I see no reason why that won't happen, certainly given today's presentation. So appreciate you joining us and opening it up to Graham's concerns. And two other quick things. No meeting with you, Nicolette, and Hudson River Park Trust could go without the question of what's the status, any updates on the estuary.
Really, there are no significant updates since Carrie was last here. Estuarium is very strongly rooted throughout the document, the education section, as well as the public access as well. And that's just in terms of the funding. We need to get up to $30 million for it, and we're about 14 million. So we're still about halfway there. We've tried a lot of different approaches and continue to just think creatively. And, you know, we want this to happen. We want, you know, there's still a funding gap though. So we welcome any ideas or suggestions of sources that we can continue to look for. But really no significant updates since we last presented on that.
GoFundMe, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but the nature of how the trust has often had to do business is we've had to go out and look for the money. And I mean, even Gansevoort, how many years? I mean, we had some funding, but I mean, it took 9+ years to, you know, of planning to get that underway. And we're hopeful maybe through this kind of revival of the Bond Act, you know, we may get some support from the state. Listen, one thing I can tell you is I really think we want this built more than you do. And I know how much you guys want this built, but I can honestly say, I mean, it's something we've just been looking forward to. And I know you all want it, and it's really time, and we're trying to find the money, and we really are. So help us if you want to work out there. We're looking, you know, Noreen had very tentatively and was very hopeful. She's tried to set a little bit of an aspirational goal to jump into the design process, you know, by the end of this year, to really push us and motivate us into, you know, continuing this along. So we're trying to keep the ball rolling while we're looking for the final capital funds needed to finish the project.
Thanks very much.
Last quick thing. The document, which is extraordinary document for sure, has as an appendix the questionnaires that were sent out. Can we get to see the actual results of those questionnaires somewhere?
I mean, yeah, they're in some format. You know, we had a long memo that we did. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share them in some way. I'm trying to think of the best way to do it.
I thought the summary of the questionnaires was included in the document, but I could be mistaken.
I didn't notice that.
It was like there was in the beginning, the first page or two just had a summary because we didn't want to, you know, take up, you know, 20 pages of the appendix with everything. It was a very qualitative survey just to kind of ground us and frame the beginning of the process a little bit.
Can I just jump in? Maybe
Yeah.
we can take this offline and have Diana, if you could follow up on seeing how we could access the questionnaires and the responses. That would be great if possible.
Yeah.
Sure, no problem.
That would be great.
Okay,
Thanks.
last committee member hand up I see is new committee member who we just introduced, Gerald Forsberg. Welcome, Gerald. Or new board member, I should say, not necessarily of this committee.
Thanks, Alice. I again, we have a full agenda. I don't want to get into too many details. I read the document as well, and I'm trying to, a couple questions. I guess June 29th, is that correct? Is the public hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
4:30 p.m.
Is that where the public can sort of chime in, I guess, on this particular document with details and, okay. Maybe I'll just plan on attending that. My only thought was in terms of safety under I guess it's 4.4. Is there any consideration being given to the bike and pedestrian intersections in upcoming funding, I guess, in particular? The reason I ask this is forgive me, let me go backwards. I love the park. My wife and I frequent it very often. It has become a safe haven during COVID in particular. And Pier 26 has been phenomenal. I've watched Little Island, grow from the water up, and really great job. Everything is coming together nicely. But in particular, this bike pedestrian intersections, I think that I believe that access is priority is given to the pedestrian typically, but that generally is not the case. We have been nearly run over more than times than I can think of. And my only thought there is that, has that been looked into as far as ways to mitigate those intersections, maybe with some lighting at the ground level, that alert the bikes, hey, this is somebody's crossing here?
So just briefly, our operations team has looked into this a lot more. So I'm definitely not the best person to talk about what we have thought about or priced out or contemplated. I mean, also the other big issue is that this is a Department of State run bike path. So it's the New York State DOT run bike path. This is not Hudson River Park. We do maintain it to some degree, like plowing it, but it is not technically not our bike path. So any major thing we do to it has to go through DOT. So that's always been, a major factor. There were a lot of things we didn't like about the barricades and how they were put in, and we fought tooth and nail to get things a little bit different, just a little bit easier for vehicles and whatnot, and that didn't work out. But nevertheless, I did, so you are, you're looking at the drafters of the document here, Tina and I, and a few others. So I did take a note of what your comment is. Of course, if you want it on the official record, the public hearing is one place to do that, or in a public comment and a written comment is another place to do that. But I actually did take a note of it, and we'll weigh it in as well.
I'm going to ask that all the committee members submit their comments to Diana and copying me, if you don't mind, so that we do keep track, and so that at our next meeting, which is before the August 9th deadline, we have made sure that we formulate those and present those to you all. And whether it's by a letter or resolution, you will get that. So Cheryl, I encourage you and everyone else that spoke today to make sure that, and anyone else that hasn't, to send those on to Diana. And then just one last comment, it looks like from a public, somebody from the public, but she's not raised her hand and it's in the chat. And I quote, "Wetlands are integral to a healthy estuary ecosystem and essential for migrating waterfowl nesting success. Can you speak to how this plan addresses the wildlife issue?" And I'm going to ask this to be the final question in the interest of time.
Sure. So with that research and habitat enhancement arm, that is an area where we really anticipate significant growth. So areas like the tide deck on Pier 26, though a very small patch, has given that wetland space to waterfowl. Then again, the north side of Gansevoort, that will be also a salt marsh that's being constructed as part of that work that's now underway on the Gansevoort Peninsula. And the third area that we're able to have soft shoreline is the Pier 76 area. There's a small beach along that area as well. So really, habitat enhancements are an area that we really anticipate large growth. And it's also something that we're a bit limited in what we can do just due to the large amount of hardscape that's in Hudson River Park. So because we have very small areas that actually have soft shoreline access, we're really starting to really take advantage of that in this next phase of piers that's being constructed.
Okay, great. Thanks very, very much again, Nicolette and Tina. I think there's a lot more to this than we have time for, of course, but I'm hopeful that the public in general and the committee members and board members will write in other comments and questions that I know you'll answer and address. And again, many thanks. And I think we're going to go over now to the other side of the peninsula. It's kind of interesting that you're all here. It's actually great. That's kind of what this community board has asked for time and time again, is to get you all at the Hudson River Park Trust well, involved with the Battery Park City Authority and the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, which you're all here. So that's great. So maybe you want to stick around. But anyway, in the meantime, many thanks. And welcome Jordan Salinger from the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, former the Office of Resiliency, formerly the Office of Recovery and Resiliency. We'll start as soon as you're ready.
And before that, it was Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability, but that predates me. So yes, our current name, Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, Jordan Salinger. I know I've seen many of you throughout the years and through our many events earlier this spring. Today, giving our quarterly update. If you've been to these before, you know what to expect. Generally, kind of quicker updates across our projects in part of that Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency portfolio. So that is BMCR, the Battery to Montgomery Coastal Resilience, FIDI Seaport, our kind of big project that we'll be going into the most detail today. The Battery Coastal Resilience at the tip of Lower Manhattan, and the series of projects going on in Battery Park City. Little different today. We're focusing less on the battery and not getting into BMCR, spending a little bit more time on FIDI Seaport because there's so much going on, and a little bit more time, a little bit of a design update from BPCA. And so with that, I will dispel with the pleasantries and get into it. Yeah, Rachel, if you could pull up the slides.
You want the yet? No.
It looks like a gray screen. I don't know if others see similarly.
Yeah, nothing yet.
Sorry about that. Hang on.
All right, you had me very worried, but disaster averted. If we could actually skip to the next slide. So here you go. This is what I was speaking to a little bit before, the suite of LMCR projects. Just very quickly, and then once again, we'll be getting into the details in a moment. As you move down the coastline, Brooklyn Bridge to Montgomery Coastal Resilience. That project is at 100% design now. Also had an infusion of capital funds in the executive budget, now fully funded at $520 million or so, and expected to break ground around the end of this year. We'll be spending most of our time, that area below the financial district and Seaport Climate Resilience Master Plan, focusing on what we're calling on-land constraints, essentially why it is so challenging to build an entirely on-land project in that area. And then some of our initial design thinking and what essentially pushes us out into the water and pulls us back. And gives you a sense of where our design is and where it's headed. A brief update on the battery coastal resilience and the sea level rise project there. And then a series of updates from the Battery Park City team. And so with that, we'll go kind of in reverse order and hand it off to Claudia to talk through their updates.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. No problem. Claudia Filipina, Director of Capital Projects at the Battery Park City Authority. So we wanted to come and give you an overview of where we are with our resiliency program and also provide the board with a design update on an item that was discussed previously. So here's a brief overview. Our Ballfields Resiliency Project, as many of you who live in the neighborhood know, we began construction earlier this month, and we anticipate that construction be completed in the fall. For the South BPC, we have our DEIS underway, and we anticipate public scoping meeting to be held in the fall of this year. We're right now at 74% design for the Pier A Plaza and battery elements, and 95% for Wagner Park and MJH. And we anticipate construction to start in early 2022 after the completion of the EIS. Our North and West resiliency, previously, as you're aware, these were two separate projects. Last year, we decided to combine them in a progressive design build. Right now, we have a consulting engineer on board, and they're working on the project definition, which will help to guide design of the project. And we anticipate selecting a progressive design build contractor in early 2022. Next slide, please. So our Ballfields project, as I said, construction has commenced. This is an interim flood protection system that is going to be going around the BBC Ballfields. During this construction, as you've probably seen if you've been on the street, they have taken Warren and Murray Street for construction. Ongoing ballfield use has been accommodated during this time. We wanted to make sure that there was no disruption to the playing season. And as I mentioned earlier, the construction is expected to be completed in October of this year. Next slide, please. Okay, on our North and West BPC resiliency, so project kickoff is happening this month. And the project definition, as I said, was underway, including a public meeting. We anticipate that to be probably sometime in late July. So we'll be coming back to the board then to discuss this further. Our RFQ for the PDB contractor is probably also going to be going out in the late summer with an RFP issuance in the fall, and then contractor selection in early 2022. So we have a lot of large milestones coming up for that project, and we're obviously really excited to get this kicked off and underway. Next slide, please. On our South project, as I mentioned, our DEIS is in progress. We anticipate the scoping to be in the fall of this year, and our construction start to be in the spring of next year once we have final notice on the EIS. I discussed the design milestones, 75% for Pier A Plaza and the Battery, 95% for Wagner Park and the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We've been working with DEP, coordinating with them for several months, and that coordination is ongoing regarding the interior drainage design. And that conversation is progressing, and we hope to have, sort of a decision made there in the next few weeks, hopefully. And we anticipate final PDC approval this summer for the project, so we're moving ahead on that as well. And as part of our South Resiliency project, we wanted to update the community board on some design changes we've made to the service entrance at the Wagner Pavilion. We have the AECOM and Thomas Pfeiffer Partners team here just to walk through this latest iteration for your review, and we're happy to take any questions you might have. Next slide, please. Next slide, actually. Rachel Denker, do you want to take over at this part, or should Tom be the one to speak to this?
I think it's okay, Claudia. If you don't mind, just keep pushing the slides forward would be great.
Okay, You're going to speak to the slide though, correct? So this is the previous design that we, I'm so sorry, that's okay.
I thought,
this is
Tom's
Hogan,
here.
This is Hogan
Go ahead.
Edelberg. Tom is on the line, but he's calling in. So I'm not sure if someone who's controlling the meeting can unmute the 646-712 number, and then Tom can speak to these slides.
Give me one moment.
Thank you.
Did I get it?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yes, you can, Tom.
Oh, terrific. I'm certainly glad we got this to work, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to talk to you about this very particular important area that we've been working on. And we put this slide up just to remind the committee where we were a few weeks ago. We had a dark granite wall, and we had quite a large service entrance where we combined the kitchen service with the park service. And I think there were some concerns as well about the handrail design. So I think this slide is what we presented back in February of 2021. So if we could advance a slide. And so here's a little bit of a detail here. We had the dark granite. We had these kind of darkened doors here for the kitchen service and for the park service. We had a little planter there in the middle that's just a blow up. So this is where we were, okay? And just this reinforces the kind of granite, the graphics, the lighting, the planter, all of this, but it had this kind of darkened appearance here, okay? And so the first thing we did, which we were really trying to respond to your comments about the scale of the doors that are down here and what we could do to make this a more friendly sidewalk experience. So the first thing we did is we moved this point up towards the north so that we could separate the doors, and by separating them, we also made them smaller. So the doors to the top of this point are the park doors, and the ones just slightly to the bottom, to the right side of the point are the doors that go to the kitchen. You can see the red line where it was, and the double black line is where it is now, okay? And so this is a plan that we think when we get to the elevation, I'll show you how this really helps. We've been able to shrink the size of the service doors for the park as they go in, still accommodating all the vehicles in the program they have. There's a person door that's there to the top so that people can come and go without opening the big doors. And then to the bottom side of the point, we have the restaurant service entrance. So that those two are not connected anymore. So we don't get this big service entrance expression there on the sidewalk, but we separate it by this solid wall, okay? And so here's an overall elevation of how we would like to respond to your comments. And we think this really makes the project so much better. We have taken the warm red material, warm concrete that we have up above, and we've taken that and we've put that on the ramp wall and on the wall where it turns into the service entrances. So the building is now expressed as one project, one building, one gesture. And then we took something that is going to be one of the signatures of the building above, the pavilion, where we've always had planters above. And these planters grow hanging vines that hang over the wall to soften the view of the building to the sky. They soften the edge, they soften the experience. You experience them on the roof deck and you experience them from the ground. So between the kind of softening of the red tone of the building, this kind of dark red warm tone, we wanted to bring those elements down to the service entrance. So we've got the dark red concrete there, the warm concrete, and we've got the hanging vines that are hanging over the wall so that you get some planting on the wall that softens the experience from the sidewalk. And then we've taken these two doors, you can see one on the right, one on the left, and we've pushed those back a little bit to give it a bit of shade and shadow. And we've toned those exactly the same red tone that we've toned all of the metal in the pavilion above. So these two are really the same project. They're one project. And they begin to present this unified front to the city, fronted by these green street trees. So when you approach the building from anywhere in the city, you get this green presence with the warmth of the concrete and the beauty and softness of the vines as they hang over the wall, okay? And so this slide is a blow up of what I was just speaking about. You can see the berms to the right and left and the planting that's in those, the kind of softness there as you're walking by, and the trees are in front, and you can see our wall that's beginning to get exposed here, where we get hanging vines and the warmth of the concrete, and the doors that are set back into the wall. And the color of that, as I said, is the same color of all of the metal that's up in the pavilion above. Okay? And this is a wall section here that shows a little bit of detail about how our planter works. As you see the image on the left, that's taken through a service door. And we then have a planter directly above that. And that planter grows vines. It hangs down over this warm concrete to soften the wall. And then the one on the left is part of the wall where you wouldn't have a service door. And that shows the wall with the vines hanging down. And sooner or later, where you don't need to go in and out, you can let the vines grow down this wall. And it would become quite beautiful with the warm concrete. And you can see, the next thing I want to talk about is this handrail, which you see up there that's been pulled back from the edge. So it's not present right at the wall. We've pulled it back a bit so that it lessens its impact and becomes even more transparent than I think you'll see it in a moment, okay? Okay, let's go one more. And so then these are generally the colors that we have. You can see the slide on the left has this pigmented concrete here that is going to be a beautiful warm color. And then the color of the metal, which is meant to complement and make this a kind of a unified building and be very soft and warm. Okay, next slide. And so then just to get to the handrail, I think there was concern about the kind of industrial nature of the handrail that we had proposed. And there was also some maintenance issues that were identified. And so what we're proposing is this handrail that you see here, that's for obviously another project, but we wanted to show you this as an image in a built condition. But the handrail is bronze, which we think would be beautiful with this darkened red concrete. And it's made up of these little rods that are vertical rods with a rectangular bar that's on top that ties them together. But you can see how transparent this handrail is and how elegant this handrail is. It really begins to dissolve, and the materiality, I think, is very copacetic with the rest of the architecture. And it has just these vertical bars. It has a simplicity, and in my view, it has a beautiful elegance. Okay? And you can see here just another photograph of this project. You can see as it begins to tail off there to the right-hand side, how it does begin to dissolve. It's very light, very transparent, so that people that are up there can see out, kids can see out, and from the city, this rail would be almost transparent as it moves as you approach the building. So you see more vines, more trees, more building above. You see your way. The transparency of this rail, I think, is hugely important for the success of the project. And so then let's go to the next slide.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom, and I can't thank you enough for this very thorough presentation. And as much as we'd love to hear every detail and be able to comment, and I fear this may not happen all in one night, so I'm just going to ask if we could,
Sure.
just finish up. Thanks very much, and forgive me for having to ask that, but we do have to cover the entire 5IC port in addition to handrails.
I'm sure. No, I'll be happy to take any questions. Is that the right moment here to do that?
It is, but I would counsel the committee and the public to understand that this is not the Wagner Park, South Battery Park City committee report on that, on those adjustments. And we thank you so much for having listened and attempted to secure alternative ways to deal with the problem at the ground level of a service entrance, which I think is not yet, in my mind, been fully resolved because it's still a service entrance, but I think it's certainly going in the right direction, I guess, and the handrail considerations there as well. But I'm just not sure we can spend the time tonight, so I'm wondering if we could ask maybe Nick Spordone, Communications at Battery Park City Authority, to arrange that we maybe have a follow-up. I'm just not sure we're going to be able to do it full justice here tonight. So if there's some major basic comments, feel free. Hi, Gwen.
This is Gwen.
Go ahead.
This is Gwen. I just wanted to make a point. The reason that it was important, we felt, to get this back in front of you, because you had asked that this be looked at and brought back to you. And so the team has worked very hard on coming up with a solution that we believe has responded as best we can to all of the comments that we've received. And we need to provide direction to the design team to move forward, because we've got deadlines, design submission deadlines, and PDC deadlines that we need to address, not for this particular element, but we must press forward with completing the whole project design. So wanted to make sure that this got in front of you as quickly as possible, and it was ready. So that's why we have it in front of you.
Thanks for the heads up. I didn't realize that, and I certainly appreciate the timing here. I will be happy to put my 2 cents in to you, and I recommend that the committee do that as well. We're probably not going to be able to cover every single detail, but if anyone has major, big questions that we are so fortunate to have the project architect here and all the players, then please go ahead, because this is a great time to get your questions answered. I have one, which is there any access to an elevator from the ground floor that we had discussed, hoping to maybe see? Is that an alternative that's been considered, or are we still, I'm assuming people will walk up the ramps?
We have considered it on multiple occasions over an extensive period of time, but the conclusion, as we had communicated at the last meeting, is that there is no feasible way of doing that.
Okay, and the second question I have is just how, I had never seen that particular perspective that you've shown. How high are I assume those are they look like towers almost, the elevator. I assume that those are the elevator enclosures. I'm not even actually sure what they are. They're sort of like 2 stacks on top. I assume those are where the elevators are inside the building. How high are those? They look above the roof plane. I just was curious. It looked quite, I just wasn't sure if that was to scale.
I think they are about 12 feet above the roof deck, something like that.
Wow, they look so different. They look much further. If you go back to your drawing, I'm just curious if that's 12 feet. It looks more like 40 or something. I found it a little confusing, but that just may be my misreading of the elevation you presented. Anyway, I don't want to hog the committees. Maybe you can bring that drawing back when you have a chance. But in the meantime, are there any other burning questions from other committee members? And thank you again.
So Alice, this is Wendy. Maybe we could just get all of those slides sent to us separately, because I'd like to look at them offline a little bit more. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm sure that can be easily arranged, right?
I'll get them over to you, Alice. They'll be on our website probably tonight. I'll send you the link.
Okay, but if
Thanks,
anybody else have questions right
Well,
now?
yeah, I mean, Alice, to follow up, this is Laura Starr, to follow up on your question about the elevator. I mean, Tom, thank you for presenting. I just think, if you can imagine the kind of weather we have and the driving rain and everything, and people trying to get into an event there, like imagine a bride in a rainstorm and she's trying to get to her wedding and she's got to walk up that like 150-foot ramp or whatever it is. It just seems to me like, it seems really critical to have a way to get in that service entrance for people to get up, for visitors to the patrons of the building to get up to the next level is one thing. And then, seeing the renderings of what's in front of the building, which is not the Pfeiffer piece of it, but the AECom piece, the steps down to the water are, there's no shade. I feel like you guys are doing okay with the resiliency question, but you're not doing okay with the human experience question. And I find that really unfortunate. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Anybody else have a comment or a question they'd like to put here in the public arena before we move on?
Alice, there was one thing that I don't know what we decided, but originally it was the staircase going up to the roof deck was wanting to be a 24/7 accessibility. And I think there was a sense that it would have to be closed off because of security. Maybe everybody followed up on that, and I'm not sure, but is the roof deck to the pavilion open 24/7, or is it not open 24/7?
Wendy, this is Gwen. I think we have shifted our expectations there in response to the comments that we received last time, and our plan is that we want it to be open and accessible 24/7, and that's the operational objective that we have for the rooftop.
Can I ask Gwen if somebody could put up the slide of just the elevation slide rather than the detail of the balustrade, which by the way is quite lovely, but the earlier elevation of the entirety of it. Thanks, just be helpful to refer to. Okay, I do see some hands up. So Betty Kay.
Thank you. I just want to ask a quick pragmatic question. Given the railings, which I think are very attractive, but practically speaking, how are they covered so that they don't superheat or freeze? Because it's not much sense, you're not going to grab for something that you can't touch.
Well, in my experience, these bronze handrails, of course, will get a little bit warm in the sunshine and a little bit cold in the wintertime, but I don't think they'll ever get to the point where you can't touch them because they're too hot. And I don't think they'll ever get to the point where they'll freeze so much that you can't touch them. So I think they will be perfectly fine in the weather all year round.
Okay.
Tom, I'm sorry. I have to disagree with
wait,
that.
whoa. Gerald.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alice. Thank you.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm going to call on you. We have sort of a little bit of a system we use. So
I'll make a note of that and bring it up later.
So hang in there. I was actually going to, well, fine. So Gerald, okay, so I assume, Betty, your question was answered, and I will move on to Gerald now.
Yeah, so not to lead with this, but it just came up. So I'll say that in terms of the bronze railings, there's an SOM building downtown that this past winter, I just about slipped down the stairs because there was so much ice all over the railing. So I would disagree with that comment that it's not going to be a safety issue. But that being said, I guess two other things regarding the design. I'm very pleased to see the drawings, the renderings having the rooftop terrace. I think if I remember this coming through before, it was very unclear to me that the rooftop terrace was actually going to be maintained as part of the design. So it is wonderful to see that. They're great views. I've spent quite a bit of time on the existing pavilion, just as a nice place to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. My next question is actually geared to, I think, towards the committee and to Alice. My understanding was that I'm a bit confused as to why this. I understand that there is a time frame involved, but I'm a little confused as to why this is being brought up now. And I guess my question is, in terms of design and design review, will another committee be reviewing this? Or is this the only chance we get at this point? Because if that's the case, I suppose there are quite a few other comments that are going to be made, and I guess we can put them into emails as well. But Alice, if you could tell me the protocol on this.
Well, the protocol, there is no such protocol, but I will say that I was as surprised as you are to have this presented tonight. But I understand from Gwen Dawson at the Battery Park City Authority that this has to happen because of time. Maybe Gwen, you want to elaborate on Gerald's question, and is there another opportunity or not to opine on this? And if, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could someone please put up the overall thing we're talking about as we look at this? So again, go back to the elevation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just going back a little bit, this pavilion and the service entrance has gone through an iteration recently, but it has evolved, and there have been at every step that we've taken, this has been in front of the CV1 committees. So this is the most recent one, and it was revised after we had another very detailed meeting precisely to discuss this entrance, which we had. We listened very carefully. I agreed with a number of the points. The team went back and came up with another iteration to be responsive to those comments. And at this point, we feel that we have been responsive, and we have brought back the best that the AECOM team and Tom Spiver team can do with the comments that we have gotten. And Battery Park City Authority believes that they have been responsive. I know that nobody's ever going to be, or there are certain folks that are not going to be happy about the fact that we don't have the elevator access at the street level. We've exhausted all of the possibilities there. We don't believe it to be feasible, nor do we believe it to be necessary, because we do have ADA access available, and we have it's universally accessible. We have the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities has agreed that the approach that we have for access to the pavilion is adequate. So we are happy to take any comments that you have tonight. We're happy to take any comments that you might want to email to us. But I don't think that there's any advantage that we believe that would come of another presentation on this at this point. We've revised it many times.
Thanks
And
Gwen,
we
can you
do
just
have,
tell
we do
us,
have time for it.
can you just tell us when the PDC is reviewing this, or is this already reviewed?
The PDC is not reviewing this. This is not within the PDC jurisdiction.
Okay, so this
The
is
PDC
going
is-
forward at this point. There's no other sort of jurisdictional review that's required here.
That's right.
Okay. And also just one other question, Tom, if you're still there, if you can see from this drawing, it seems like the person on the right tower is a lot smaller than, you know, the 12, there's a lot more than 12 feet above him. Why is that reading sort of like a 40-foot tower? I'm just not sure I'm understanding this drawing. Is this accurate?
Yes, it is. And, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure how tall that tower is. I was thinking about that after I answered you. I can go back and get that dimension for you.
Yeah, if you could provide dimension drawings, which we've asked for many times actually, of elevations and plans, that would be really helpful. Thanks very much.
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
I got that confused with the height of the wall down on the street. Sorry about that.
It looks like, you know, like more like 60 or more feet. Okay, so Justine, I'd love to wrap this up soon because we have a lot of really
Things to
critical
talk
stuff
about.
to
No.
follow. I know how juicy all this is, and it is really important, but yeah,
No,
okay.
I'll be quick, and I apologize because I did sign in a little bit late, but Gwen or someone from the Battery Park City Authority. So what's the budget for this now, for the Wagner Park portion of it? Do we have that? Was that presented?
For the Wagner Park portion of it, I don't have that at my fingertips. I mean,
How
we
about
do
the
have
whole-
it. Happy to
yeah,
provide
yeah.
it.
The whole ball of wax? Do we know what this is going to cost, the South Battery Park, the South Southern Resiliency Plan?
Yeah, we don't, again, since we don't have the 95% drawings yet for the Pier A Plaza and the Battery segment, we don't yet have the 95% cost estimate, but it's going to be right around 200 million. That's not counting the interior drainage components, because we don't have enough, we don't have that design advanced far enough to have a good cost estimate on that yet.
And that's in the buildings itself, or in the structure itself, correct? When you say the interior drainage?
No, they're talking about the bathtub effects.
Oh,
behind-
okay, underneath.
Behind
Okay.
this, which without resolving that, we really don't know if the whole thing works. And we
Oh,
also
wow.
don't know the budget. And if we're spending over $200 million, we should have another meeting that is completely
Yes.
dedicated to this and not rush it through. And I realize this doesn't have to go to the PDC, but it should come to the community in a
It should
good
come to the
faith
community,
way
and
without rushing through it.
And I would
Yes,
offer a meeting at the Battery Park City Committee if you know, to make it another, which is coming up the first week in July, I believe. So if that's helpful, and if there's some more information, I would offer time to have this discussion there, if that's helpful to anybody. But
Okay, we're going to take that point offline because I think we.
no, that's fine. But
Yeah.
but I haven't gotten to my question yet. My question was, I know, Nick, sorry.
No. Just so the committee has it here, Justine. I know, just so there's no confusion for kind of the newcomers. Yes, we've always said the internal drainage, interior drainage conversation is a separate conversation, which we will wholeheartedly and enthusiastically be back to the committee on when we have an update on it. So that's not this. That's a separate conversation.
You know what,
We'll
Nick?
be back
It's
to you on.
not a separate conversation, because if you're calling this a resiliency project and you don't resolve the interior drainage, you don't have a resiliency project.
So
I'm sorry.
we're aware of that,
Separate timelines, Laura. Okay, we
I
have what we
understand
have
that may be
ready.
separate timelines, but it's a humongous amount of money and infrastructure and intrusion onto streets and all sorts of stuff. And it's really not fair to the community. It's not acting in good faith to not show the whole thing together. And for this amount of public money being spent, it's probably going to end up being $500 million at least. The design should have an elevator. There should be shade on the steps, and there should be a more responsive process.
This is wildly out of
May I-
range of what we're talking about.
But may I just say this, Laura? I mean, Alice, because I'm getting interrupted, and my point is simple, and then I know the answer is not going to be an answer, which is fair, but I'd just like to make the point, which is, Laura, you said this is a huge amount of money, of public money. It's not public money. It's people, it's being paid by the ground rent, which is not public money, and yes, partly pilot of the people who live in Battery Park City. So this is being built on the backs of the people who live in Battery Park City, and who, as people are hearing me, will hear me talk at the full board meeting, people are being forced out of their homes because they cannot pay the ground rent and the taxes. And I am so much in favor of resiliency and the changes. And I will say to Gwen, this iteration, the piece of it that I can see is much better than what you came with last time. And so that's all good, and it looks nicer. And I thank you for the time and effort and energy that was put into making the changes, because I do appreciate that. And I do once again say you're listening, but I am still very frustrated and just very depressed at the amount of money this is costing. And again, it's not public money. It's on the backs of the people in Battery Park City. But that's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. To be continued, needless to say. Rosa Chang, I think, is our final committee member who wanted to speak on this, and then we will move on. Thanks, Rosa.
Hi, thank you. This is going to be short and sweet. So I just wanted to thank you for being so responsive to the concerns that we had specifically regarding the service entry area and how that faces out onto our city and our buildings and our neighborhoods. And so I appreciate that. I was wondering if you could push it just a little bit further. I love that you separated the entries and made them smaller. Can you make the service entry, the vehicular entry, smaller as well by perhaps integrating the human scale door into one of the larger vehicular doors? They do this in Europe all the time with gates and doorways and things, where you basically have, you know, a larger door that's meant for vehicles, or, well, I guess in the olden days, horses and carriages. And they, within those doors, actually have human scale doors. So it's just a little smaller second door integrated into a larger overall door. And that might make the service entry a little bit smaller and then give you more space to extend the plantings, which would make it, again, feel less like, you know, the back, the rear, the service, the forgotten, unwanted part of the building, which is what we as the occupants of the city actually see.
I didn't realize there was a vehicle.
You know,
Tom, are you, okay.
Go ahead.
We'll certainly be happy to look at that. Certainly happy.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much. Okay, it looks to me that we've captured all sorts of folk on the committee, and I don't see any hands raised from the public. There's clearly going to be more on this, and we certainly will provide to the committee, to the Battery Park City Authority, a little bit of a summary of the comments and maybe additional comments, and perhaps when we go forward to talk about the interior drainage, this can be dovetailed with that. I'm not sure how we'll address some of these things going forward, but it sounds like there'll be another time, I hope, where we can go forward on the South Battery Park plans. In the meantime, moving forward on the next phase of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Plans by, I guess, Jordan. Thank you.
Yep. And we can hand it off to Jennifer Cass from EDC's capital team to talk about the project here. It's actually on the, move forward to the next slide.
Hi, thank you. It just took me a second to get myself off of mute. Hi, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Jennifer Cass. I'm representing the capital program of EDC. We are managing the Battery Park Coastal Resilience and Wharf Replacement Project on behalf of the Parks Department. So we presented here in depth before. I'm just going to give a brief update on where we are with the project. We had a very successful open house on March 24th. I know a lot of you had attended, and I think we had a lot of great feedback from the community. We are, looking at the comments we've received and incorporating them to the best that we can. We're continuing our coordination, of course, with the Battery Park City Authority, who you just heard from. We had our PDC conceptual review submitted about a month ago. And we've been coordinating with various alphabet soup of agencies and groups which are critical to the project, including NYPD and FDNY in relation to security of the site, Office of Emergency Management, Statute Cruises, and National Park Service, who of course have operations at the wharf. So we're really digging in with Statute Cruises and NPS in terms of how the proposed site and landings will work for their operations, as well as the staging that will need to occur during construction. We actually just received our preliminary design documents. So those are the 30% design. And that's being reviewed by various parties, including Parks and EDC right now. And we are in the process of making comments and returning those back to the Stantec design team. One piece that I didn't note on this slide is just that we are onboarding, we've been onboarding Hunter Roberts as our construction manager, and they have signed their contract. So we are just submitting that through the approvals within the EAC various departments. So they are, starting to attend meetings and onboarding and getting involved in the project. That's my update.
Thanks,
Great.
Jennifer.
Thank you. And so with that, we will head to FIDI Seaport and talk about the master planning effort there. If you could go to the next slide. And I will say at the outset, I will go through my portion at lightning speed because we are also joined by Ronnie Dietz and Joe Marone from Arcadis, our consultant team, who will be handling parts of the presentation specific to on-land constraints and some of our design work, which I know you guys are probably much more interested in than hearing me speak about this. So that said, I'll go through this pretty quickly. Since we last met with this committee, we've been working feverishly on a number of fronts. We've actually met with the Aquatic Resources Advisory Committee. That is a panel of state and federal regulators to discuss some of our project proposals. And one issue we're going to be going into a lot more detail of why an entirely on-land strategy is not feasible in this location. Also why kind of a fuller extension is not feasible. We've also been moving forward our aquatic habitat sampling, the fall, winter, and now spring seasons. Our hydrodynamic and wave modeling has advanced, and we're kind of moving on to a next phase of work there. What this means practically is how tall, do we have to build up to protect against some of those threats, both sea level rise and surge. We've had number of engagement events, a virtual open house, another one that we'll actually be talking about in a bit later this month, a series of workshops, one of which focused on envisioning a 21st century waterfront, panel discussions on financing resiliency, as well as engaging with a number of students. That's something that we've heard from this committee a number of times is looking for ways to engage with the youth. As well as advancing some early project concepts, some of which we'll be going over later tonight. Next slide. So with all of that, wanted to get a sense, give you a sense of what we've heard. These aren't kind of shouldn't be taken literally. These are kind of just a broad stroke of the conversations we've been having. From a process perspective, making sure that we are as transparent as possible, and actually we'll get to a point on that in a moment. I mentioned before, bringing in youth perspectives, exhaust all on-land options. That'll be something that we'll be talking about as well. From a design perspective, look at opportunities to increase open space with a variety of different uses. Examine the FDR. We know that is an asset and kind of at the end of its useful life in some ways. And if we are taking kind of a large bite of the apple here, we've heard that this is something that should be considered as part of the resiliency conversation. If you're doing something like that, how can we connect New Yorkers to the waterfront and kind of repair some of what has been cut off? From a financing and development perspective, very clearly, and this is our perspective as well, resilience should be driving the design here, not development. And kind of to kind of any of those conversations should be contextual. If that conversation is happening in the seaport, maybe a little bit different than the sort of conversation you can have in the financial district. And so that'll all be kind of expressed in what you'll see in some of our early design work. Next slide. So we'll not go over everything here, but this should give you a sense of how kind of what we heard from you is translating directly into our design. Fundamentally, we need to cite coastal resilience infrastructure. That is challenging for multiple reasons, but is kind of the core mission of this project. Beyond that, we are addressing not just kind of the one-time surge event, but we are also addressing sea level rise. Those are two different elevations. And so the designs you will see reflect that. There's great open space right now. We know that kind of anything we do here will impact that. So at minimum, we need to replace that and look for opportunities to enhance it. Provide universal access. We will need a giant drainage infrastructure option to accompany this project. I know that has come up kind of in the conversation earlier tonight. Protect our historic and cultural assets, and plan for new resilient ferry terminals and facilities. Those are the assets that we think are potentially most at risk from sea level rise by the 2050s and potentially sooner in some spots. And with all of that down at the bottom, what can we do that is feasible from a construction perspective, and that, as I mentioned before, our work with the Aquatic Resources Advisory Committee, what can we get permitted and what can we advance? Next slide. So most of our conversation will really focus on a couple things, but essentially, as we move forward, we are really looking at that middle area there, the narrow to moderate extension. As I mentioned before, in our conversations with the regulators, we spent significant time looking at an entirely on-land solution and why we believe that's not feasible in that location, as well as what we call the kind of maximum shoreline extension of up to 500 feet. We've heard clearly that is not desirable, not permittable, and something that we don't plan to move forward with. So we will spend the remaining time looking at the kind of narrow to moderate extension. That said, I want to make a very clear point here, and this should show up in our language. There is no entirely in water option, and there is no entirely on land. It will likely be a combination of the two. In order to protect and connect to the floodplain, there will be certain areas where the project will need to come back on land. So that's kind of an important distinction that we just wanted to be very clear on. Next slide. One last point I wanted to make. We know that the Community Board 1, in partnership with CB3, Waterfront Alliance, and Rebuild by Design, sent, I think, a very constructive note asking for kind of a number of things relating to our prior work, both kind of dating back to Sandy, Seaport City, kind of earlier days. And so we wanted to be responsive to the community board and community in general. So these are a number of things we've shared with folks and we'll be putting online as well, just so that folks know kind of all the kind of serious thinking that has gone on that led to this moment. Once again, back to the kind of Seaport City days, up to our current work, including an on-land memo that kind of details what we'll be getting to in a moment, kind of the constraints and the challenges of siting an entirely on-land project. And so with that, I will hand it off to Joe from Arcadis to walk through the challenges of siting an entirely on-land project.
Thanks, Jordan. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, so what we're going to talk about is the challenges of siting this entirely on-land option. But it's not just locating the coastal flood defense on land. It's also making sure we can accommodate those other project purposes that Jordan mentioned, accommodating the access to the waterfront, accommodating the existing maritime uses, and also considering the day-to-day tidal flooding that will be an issue in the area. And I think that's illustrated pretty well on this graphic. So what we can see in the dark blue is the change in average high water as we progress with sea level rise through the years. And I think it's worth noting that our target time frame for this project is the 2100s, and that is different from some of the other projects that are currently being proposed. We're taking a little longer horizon for our project. And you can see the other interesting thing to point out are where on the right, you can see the approximate elevations of the current shoreline. And by the 2050s, in certain areas, you'll be starting to see daily flooding just from the tides. And then at 2100, this is based on the sea level rise predictions. Obviously, there's some uncertainty around sea level rise, but this is the best data we have right now. You can see by 2100, we'll pretty much everywhere along the study area will be experiencing daily flooding from tides. So one of the things we've looked at is we really want to have this passive or constant level of protection. And for the target for that right now is elevation 11. And that's to not only keep like the average daily tides, but probably like on a monthly level, plus a little allowance for waves, because we know waves are a big concern in this area. So that's an area where we want to have that consistently, where somebody does not have to go out and do something to have that level of protection. And we can also see the more infrequent storms and how those are changing over time. If we look at the light blue, and you can see by 2100, we're getting up pretty high above the existing ground surface where we want to be. And then the other thing that I did mention is we talked about waves. This is probably one of the most exposed locations in Manhattan for waves. So we anticipate having larger waves here than we would have either up the north on the East River or north on the Hudson. And what that means is we do want to have additional height above to take care of those waves. So we're actually looking at target elevation probably around, it's going to vary across the study area, but in this 20 to 25 foot elevation range. And that actually also, I know there was a discussion briefly earlier on interior drainage, and that's one of the things with why we want to have these elevations is because the waves can actually come over the top of the wall and then impact your interior drainage system. Let's go to the next slide. So just kind of this quick overview of some of the things we'll talk about in a little more detail, and just so we're all on the same page when we talk about them. So a flood wall, that's a pretty typical coastal defense option in urban areas. It's going to be implemented in parts of ESCR and BMCR, and I think also as part of the Battery Park City work. Portions of it will be flood wall. We'll talk about some of the advantages of that as we move forward. We also considered building level approaches where you're going to come in and harden existing structures and close all the openings in those. So that's another option that we've considered. Street raising, I think that's kind of self-evident. In some areas, they're looking at raising the level of the roads, and that provides some level of flood protection, as well as it's good for emergency access as well. When we talk about deployable measures, what we really mean is something that's not in place all the time, but is put in place ahead of a storm to provide flood defense. And that could be things like gates, it could be deployable walls, or it could even be some of the just-in-time measures that are being proposed, like the Tiger dams or HESCO barriers. But anything that's not there most of the time is what we'll call deployable. And that's what we don't want to have below elevation 11. Everything, we will need some deployable measures above elevation 11, but below elevation 11, we'll want everything passive. Let's go to the next slide. So what makes the siting flood defense so challenging? One is just, if we're talking flood walls, is that you do need a lot of vertical clearance to install a flood wall. And we saw some of those elevations. If you're talking about getting up to elevation, as an example here, 23, you know, that's, it can be, 15 feet above the existing grade. So it's a substantial elevation. And also you do need horizontal space because you have to have a foundation for the flood wall. And also, besides the foundation, you also need to have operations and maintenance access. So you do need a pathway to site your coastal flood defense for the flood wall. Speaking a little bit more about the foundations, you do need support for these structures. And so in an area like our study area where you have a lot of underground obstructions, where you have subway tunnels, where we have the interceptor, where we have the oilostatic electric lines, all those are challenges to siting this structure. So you have to consider those locations when you're looking for a spot. And then, as I mentioned, as we mentioned several times, we are looking to get up to elevation 11 with as a minimum everywhere. And we'll see how that plays out in the next couple of slides. So just in terms of space, so the waterfront here is really dominated by roadways and transportation. And on the southern part of the study area, which is shown in pink, there is very, very little space between the existing roadways and the water. And some places it's basically zero. So very limited room to site flood defense, as well as do the other things we want to do in terms of waterfront access and maritime uses. So if we look predominantly on the north side, what we see is the FDR really is the dominant feature between the existing buildings and the water. So obviously we wanted to look at that as both a challenge and an opportunity. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things we looked at was siting flood defense underneath the FDR. So putting a flood wall underneath the FDR, we are, and I will point out that these are heights in here, not elevations. So just the difference, elevations are to a set datum. In this case, when we talk about the datum, we're talking about the North American vertical datum, which is the same as like what FEMA uses. But in this case, we're talking about the height of the structure or the distance above the existing ground. So in this particular location, the bottom of the FDR superstructure is about 16.5 feet above the existing ground. In order to get to our level of coastal flood protection, we're looking at a structure that would be about 14 feet above the existing ground. So that only leaves us 2.5 feet of clearance below the existing FDR superstructure. And DOT has told us that they need a minimum of 5 feet clear to do the maintenance that they need to do on the FDR. So we don't have the vertical clearance underneath the FDR to install our flood defense system. Let's go to the next slide. So can we modify the FDR to achieve our flood protection goals? So we looked at a couple of ways to do that. We looked at what we're calling a trough option, which would kind of be like the Battery Park underpass. Can we modify this system to function more like the Battery Park underpass and provide access over the top? The problem is, in this case, with the subway tunnels. And if we do this trough option, we end up intersecting with the subway tunnels, and that's really kind of a non-starter for the project. We also looked at a full tunnel option, which would be similar to the Hugh L. Carey tunnel. But if you do that, you're still having in-water impacts because now you're putting the tunnel out in the water. You still have potential to interfere with subway tunnels. And where you come back ashore, you're going to cut off the shoreline and also some of your maritime uses. So neither, and plus that would be extremely expensive just for the tunnel infrastructure. So these options were taken off the table for those reasons. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what other modifications might we do to the FDR? And we showed that there are some, we do have some space under, where the FDR is, but if we're still trying to accomplish our other goals, we can't accomplish all those other goals and stay on the land. We can't provide our passive or minimal level of protection. We can't provide the universal access we want to the water. And we have some constraints then on how we get to our waterfront uses. So it's not the it's not the complete solution of modifying how the FDR works. Let's go to the next slide, please. Jumping back to some of the other alternatives we talked about, the building level approaches. So if you look on, none of the structures here were designed with the idea that they would withstand the waves and impact loads that will be needed for a flood defense system. So we're talking about pretty much having to replace the facades or build another structure adjacent to the facade. And you can see what that elevation would look like on the right. The red line shows how much of the facade would have to be rebuilt or with a wall that would cover that in this area. And then also the other things to point out is you can see all the openings that would be required for doorways, vehicle access, windows. So all those would have to be deployable components, which would be a lot of operations and maintenance to maintain on private property. We also have, just one other thing here is that it also does not eliminate the need for foundations or it doesn't protect the roadway, so you still could have street level flooding. Now we can go on, thank you. Raised streets are another option. The problem is with the elevations we're trying to get to, it's not practical making the cross street tie-ins or also maintaining access to existing structures. Where we have certain areas, maybe where we're looking at our tie-ins upland, where we can get that height to below 4 feet, then we think that raised streets might be a viable solution. But over most of the study area, the elevations just make this option impractical. Let's go to the next slide. And then deployable measures. So as we said, we are going to need deployable measures in some locations to meet our access requirements. What we want though, are we want deployables that are going to be quickly be able to be put in place and also are designed for the wave and impact climates that we expect in this area. So things like the just-in-time measures are not really going to be a solution we're looking at here. We're going to be looking at structural solutions that can be deployed like like gates. The other thing I'll just say is also the gates still have, in some cases, larger foundation requirements than the actual flood wall, just the way the load paths work on them. So it's not eliminating that concern by going with a deployable system. All right. So what about deployable systems underneath the FDR? And just one of the other constraints that we run into with like a flip up gate type deployable system underneath the FDR is the available horizontal space. Because with the flip up, you have to, that's got to sit in the ground, and then your foundation has to go around it. So you actually need quite a bit of horizontal space to fit these floodgates. And because of the elevation we're trying to get to, you don't actually have enough horizontal space under the FDR for this type of system to work in this location with the elevations we're trying to get to. Let's go to the next slide. And so I don't need, sounds like I don't need to go into too much detail. We understand that we don't want to create a bathtub. It seems like that point is well understood. So we are looking at what infrastructure would be required in order to mitigate the potential for that bathtub or ponding impact with our coastal defense structure. And right now, we think at a minimum, we are going to need a new pump station to mitigate those effects. Let's go to the next slide. So just a quick recap. So we've looked at this in a good amount of detail, and an entirely on land project that provides the daily tidal flooding, the access, the maritime use, and the coastal defense is just not there. It will be a combination. There will be parts of the system that are on land, but there will be parts that need to be in the water as well. There's very limited available space along the waterfront due primarily to the transportation infrastructure. We looked at a number of options to modify the FDR. Some are infeasible and some still don't provide all the space that we really need. Neither building level or street raising are viable alternatives for this area. As the whole solution, they can be part of the solution and part of a good resiliency plan. Deployable measures will have a role to play in the project, but we want them to be reliable. We want them to be structurally sound, and we want them to be only above elevation 11, where we want to have a completely passive system. The underground infrastructure actually plays a big role in siting our flood defense and our other uses in the area. The subways, the drainage infrastructure, all really have been considered and are constraints that are going to need to be worked around. And then finally, as we mentioned, new drainage infrastructure will be part of the project. And I think that's my wrap, and I will turn it over to Ronnie.
Thank you, Joe. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. All right, so going to quickly just spend a little bit of time talking about how we've been approaching the design of the project. So if we go to the next slide. So how do we build our coastal defense without walling off the seaport and financial district from the waterfront? And as Joe has said and Jordan has said, this has really been a key question guiding so much of our work. How do we ensure a connected waterfront even while citing coastal defense? I also want to note that not only would a wall at the water's edge disconnect us from waterfront uses, but it would also create an unsafe condition as the wall would be so close to the viaduct structure, as can be seen in the image, and the space kind of between the yellow wall and where the viaduct is. This could create poorly lit corridors, unhealthy air quality, and that's not an acceptable condition. So if we go to the next slide. So then the question becomes, why can't we push out the shoreline slightly to provide the constant raised edge to protect from daily tidal flooding and use gates to protect from bigger coastal storms? And Joe mentioned this a little bit, and we've learned that the Fidei Seaport neighborhoods have much larger waves as a result of its location in the New York Harbor as compared to neighboring studies and projects. These larger waves plus the lower ground elevations make gates and other types of deployable measures, as Joe has spoken about, less suitable for our project area. And as a result, we need to use gates really sparingly. We're using them in concert with a raised edge approach. But we found that a solution that relies predominantly on gates is not an applicable solution here. So then if we go to the next slide. So what are we doing? In order to achieve the project's goals, we're proposing to extend the shoreline of Lower Manhattan so that we have enough space to site our coastal defense, and that's again shown in the yellow band, while also enough space to ensure that everyone, including those in wheelchairs, with strollers, elderly, can access the water and participate in public life. So this requires space to ensure that the slopes are appropriate. We can get up to the design flood elevation of plus 23 feet, NAV D88, and then also making sure that we can get vehicles to the flood defense for regular inspections, as well as maritime uses, such that if there's an emergency or anything of the sort, that vehicles can get up to the line of defense. And if we go one more, we also need to get back down to the water. And we need to ensure that everyone can get back down to the water. The maritime uses, a publicly accessible waterfront that would be relocated outboard of the line of defense. And then at that water's edge, we would need to ensure that our ferry terminals and other maritime uses are resilient, and thinking about how we create an esplanade condition at that passive level of flood protection as Joe described. So if we go to the next slide. So this diagram breaks out, the pop-up there. So this diagram breaks our design approach into a few different zones to demonstrate how we are approaching core project drivers and how we will site coastal defense while still maintaining access to the waterfront and maritime uses. So the first of these zones, shown in purple, is the transportation corridor, which begins at the sidewalk along South Street and stretches to the existing bulkhead. And here we are considering options that transform the FDR Drive viaduct as part of this project. Then we get to zone 2, which is shown in orange, and this is what we call the publicly accessible flood protection zone. It's the area that navigates the grade change from the existing esplanade to the top of our future flood defense. And then zone 3 is the continuous waterfront access and maritime zone, and it's the area water side of the flood defense, which will become the new waterfront esplanade and provide New Yorkers access to maritime transit. And important to note that some of these elements are less flexible, such as the ones that are driven by, say, key engineering needs, the space for a caisson, a flood wall, but others are more flexible. And that's where we are working to collectively reimagine the waterfront with the broad public, with you all, with key stakeholders, to create a unique and varying condition along our waterfront edge. We go to the next slide. So knowing we need to get people from the neighborhood to the waterfront, one of the most important considerations is how to provide universal access to the waterfront and maritime uses. And a major aspect of this is understanding really the users. Who are we designing for, including those with strollers or in wheelchairs? And this project area serves a particularly diverse range of users, from residents to visitors, that we need to be mindful of as we're putting forth this design. So one of the ways in which we're doing this, shown in the graphic, is considering the use of what are called switchbacks. Switchbacks ensure users arrive at a similar point along the waterfront that they started. It also has gentle slopes that can accommodate universal access across the site, while also helping us to minimize our in-water footprint. As Joe mentioned, the on-land is not feasible, but now we're in a zone of how do we mitigate our disturbance into the water, and switchbacks are one of those ways that help us to shrink and consider our footprint. We're also considering path widths that are wide enough to accommodate a variety of users, as well as vehicles to maintain and operate the site. So really thinking about all different types of uses as we're shaping this shoreline. And if we go to the next slide, within this space are also many design opportunities for how we get up to the flood protection and how and where we can site program. So this zone is not only critical for placing programs that are there today, but also for expanding and including new program that would serve the community. So as you can just see in these diagrams, we could approach this zone in a variety of different ways. We can employ multi-level open spaces such as ramps, terraces, and seating to create different types of passive open space. We could look to incorporate areas for recreation and play, or alternatively, we can use buildings to assist in navigating the grade change. And if we go to the next slide. And then lastly, we need to get back down to the water, the maritime uses, provide again that continuous esplanade along the East River. Less space is required on this side to get back down to the water's edge because we have less of a grade change. So we only need to get back down to that +11, that constant level of flood protection. And the street grid also has less of an influence on our configuration on this side. Also within this zone remains a lot of opportunities to co-create with the community. We have 2 open houses coming up at the end of the month. So just a plug for June 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. and then on June 30th from 4 to 6 p.m. We're excited to continue to discuss these different opportunities, whether it's the experience along the Esplanade, what type of programs we should prioritize at the water's edge, and really co-create this waterfront together. And with that, I will pass it back to Jordan.
Thank you, Ronnie. So I think she did most of the heavy lifting there and got the plug in for the public meetings coming up. But just generally wanted to give you a sense of our strategy. Certainly heard a lot from this committee before on our approach, finding ways to be creative in terms of our engagement during a pandemic, and doing as much as we can to kind of replicate kind of the in-person experience and make it a little bit more interactive. So once again, upcoming public meetings a week from today on the 28th, as well as on the 30th. The 28th is 6 to 8 and the 30th is 4 to 6. We also have a new interactive portal / website that we kicked off earlier this year that all of our materials go on. We had 3 public workshops that I mentioned earlier on kind of deep dives. As you can probably tell, there's a lot going on in this project, and it's hard in kind of any one session to kind of give any one issue the time it deserves. So that's why we broke it down to do those workshops, as well as engaging with the youth at Peckslip School and the Harbor School. Next slide. One more. And so just to give you a sense, we are going into the dog days of summer. And so we'll be working, obviously, and around. Here tonight, have the 2 open houses and plan to be back in full force at the end of the summer and into the fall. I know the Battery Park City South project has their project scoping meeting. The North and West project that Claudia mentioned before has their kickoff, or I guess it's essentially a re-kickoff of that work. The Battery will be having the second public meeting following the one that happened in the fall. Sorry, in the spring. And BMCR will be transitioning from EDC to DDC. Procurement is kind of ongoing and will be essentially handed off to DDC at this point. Vidi Seaport, not shown there, but we're still here. We'll be having kind of a number of things as well headed into the fall. So with that, I will cede my time and see if there are any questions.
Oh, thanks very much, Jordan and everyone. It was a terrific presentation. I just wanted, before I open up to questions, I just wanted to ask Jordan if you would just review briefly, because I do get a lot of questions here in the chat. Just what is the thinking of the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency towards the West Side? I mean, how does that going to be looked at in the future, and what is the thinking currently on the West Side of Lower Manhattan?
Right. So for folks that aren't familiar, there are a number of initiatives, some of which due to external challenges, were paused. Most notably, the New York, New Jersey HUDSON and tributary study, which is an assessment of the entire region, did have analysis of a west side shore-based measure, is what they call it, kind of an on-land protection as part of their work. In the prior federal administration, that was paused. Folks are optimistic that that work will return, although we do not have a timetable, and it does require some congressional action. But we are engaged with our federal delegation and pushing for that to be restarted. It's also an interim flood protection measure effort where there was some analysis initiated that was paused during COVID. That has not been restarted, kind of looking at, not protecting against these severe kind of giant Sandy-like storm events, but, nor'easters, kind of other kind of smaller coastal events. And I would, just also say, some of the complexities mentioned by the prior speaker, I think are accurate. It's kind of jurisdictionally a challenge. There's a number of things under the areas there, both the park and the roadway that is under state jurisdiction, likely where flood protection would be needed. And so, I think this does require kind of an all levels of government approach. I'm familiar that a letter has been sent to DEC on this matter, and hopeful that will kind of restart the conversations to address the issue.
That would be great, and we're really going to push for that as much as we're very excited about what's going on the other side. We really do want to keep pushing forward. It's a critical area for all of the West Side. So I think I'm going to start with Jeff Galloway. And Jeff, I'm sorry if you had a question before on the Battery Park City.
No, it was on this.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Although my comment, I think, is relevant to the Battery Park City as well. I mean, obviously, any of these resiliency matters or measures have a very strong impact on the neighborhoods that they are being placed in. Generally speaking, probably more negative impacts than positive, although both your office and Battery Park City Authority have certainly gone to great efforts to try to put lipstick on the pig of a big wall, basically. But the measures are driven by this 23-foot plus design flood elevation. And so I want to just ask about that. I mean, if it weren't that number, if the DFE were 15, we'd be looking at something that was very different than what we are looking at. So the sort of the drastic nature of these measures is driven by that 23-foot or more number. In some of the documentation that has been published, like the March 29 climate resiliency study, it indicates that these flood elevations were based on what was characterized as a conservative interpretation of the New York City Panel on Climate Change estimates. But I'm not sure what conservative means in this context. I mean, there's a line in there that says this study used the 90th percentile projections, which are the most conservative. Does that mean that it's 90% likely that the flood levels will be at least that high? Or is it 90% likely that the flood levels will be that high or lower? And the answer to that question makes a big difference on judgment calls that are made. Because if it's the latter, if it's that it's a 90% likelihood that flooding will reach this level, but maybe lower, the question becomes, well, what would the 80% number be? It may not be linear. If 80% is 15 feet, maybe the old 80-20 rule is a better rule to be following than a 90-10 rule. But if it's the former, then this really does look like something that needs to be done. If it's 90% likely that it will be at least this much, as opposed to at most this much, the design considerations are very different. So let me just pause a moment. Do you know which it is?
So Jeff, that's an excellent question. And I think everything you described is accurate. Just to give other folks some familiarity, we work very closely with the New York panel on climate change, essentially kind of a downscaled version of the international body that provides similar estimates and projections internationally. And yes, so for our planning efforts, we use this 90% kind of conservative estimate. That's something that the BMCR project looks at. That's BPCA's work, and that's kind of guiding our kind of our efforts and help to contribute to that 23 number you used before. As for your specific question there, I may have to defer to Ronnie or Joe, who know this world a touch better than I do. But I'll please correct me. I believe, yeah, 90% implies there's a 10% chance over the so this is using 2100 estimate. But Ronnie or Joe, please correct the record.
I'll jump in. I'll just say that those are specifically what we're talking about is specifically the sea level rise scenario. So that's the change in the sea level. That's not necessarily related to your risk from coastal storm events. So there is based on the numbers that we have, there is a 90% chance that our sea level rise projections will not be exceeded. So that is correct. But our level of risk is really related more to those storm events. And that's a little bit different question in terms of what those probabilities are. Because we are still, yeah.
Just clarification. So is the 90% basically relating to the 11-foot elevation, which is what you are setting as the design elevation to avoid essentially daily flooding, but that the 23% is based on a different risk assessment? Is that a fair characterization?
It's a different, yes, the 11 is based primarily on the sea level rise scenarios. But what the risk is associated with storm events is how we're setting that higher coastal flood defense elevation.
And is that 100-year storm or 50-year storm?
We're looking at the 100-year storm.
Okay. I throw that out as a point of discussion. It depends on how risk averse you are, but if the numbers, if by using an 80% risk as opposed to a 50-year storm or 80% likelihood of daily flooding, takes the number from 23 down to 15. I don't know if it's linear, and I'm just giving that as a hypothetical. I think that's a policy discussion worth having because it could be drastic differences on the measures that you're employing to protect. If it's 23 versus 22, maybe it doesn't make any difference. But if it's 23 versus something like 15 or 16, lots of things might be possible that otherwise are not feasible in terms of protective measures.
Just one quick point on that, and I think it's an excellent conversation. I will say that a lot of the thinking that goes behind this is related to the kind of lifetime of the asset. And so if you are building, let's say, flip up gates that will likely only be around 50 to 75 years, may not need to be as conservative, both with the kind of the sea level rise estimates and the sort of surge. But the sort of project we have here where there's I would argue kind of a generational effort, potentially extending the shoreline. I think it does give you a little bit more opportunity. Ideally, this has much longer than a 50 to 75 year life. You might want to take a look at kind of a more conservative estimate.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jeff, that's a great question. It came up at the Battery Park City Authority plans for Wagner Park that never fully, I think, got addressed. And I think it's something that we'd love to have a little bit more clarity on. Jordan, if there's things that we could read or be informed, because that precise question did come up, and it's always one that I know confuses me as to why we go so conservatively and how different things would be if we shaved off a few feet. In any case, okay, let's have Michael Francower.
Thanks, Oz, and thanks, Jordan, and the team for the presentation. I think you actually answered a bunch of my questions, but I have two questions. One's a quick one just about for the Battery Wharf team. You mentioned that you're working with Liberty Cruises, and I was just wondering, is that Battery Wharf expected to be fully open to the public, or is that going to, is like Liberty Cruises recently expanded to the east, and they're taking a big portion of the Battery Wharf and the gardens there. Is that expected to be permanent? This might be a question that's not for you guys, but just wanted to ask it.
Yeah, so we had to have some changes in operations recently due to the condition of the wharf. Some of the slips were shut down, and we're looking into doing some temporary repairs until we can implement the full-scale project. The wharf will be occupied by Statue Cruises, who is a subsidiary contract to National Park Service in the future as well. The parks, if you're on the line, you could speak to the contracting, but there will still be a ferry going from the Battery to Liberty Island in the future. That is an integral part of the project to maintain that use of the wharf.
Okay, great, Jennifer. So yeah, so the current arrangement is temporary, is what I'm hearing. And I'll just, my comment is, so even before, I guess, the current arrangement, I guess it's not Liberty Cruises, Statue Cruises. There's been a lot of like metal barricades, you know, put up to maintain their pier, which is, you know, both unsightly and just gives the appearance of yet another, you know, public space that the public cannot get access to. So when you guys are planning for, you know, this tenant, if there's anything you guys can do to maintain as much public access as possible and plan so that we don't have to have, you know, metal barricades everywhere, that would be fantastic.
That's definitely something that we're looking at, is how do we make the most efficient use of the space and kind of shift some of the slips. I think the barricades that you're referring to are related to the safety of the wharf right now. So there are a lot of areas that are closed off to the public because we don't want people walking on them right now.
Sure. Yeah, I've noticed those as well. I was referring more to the ones that they use them to create the lines for the queuing. But yeah, I'm so glad that you guys are thinking about that. Thanks so much. And then for the FIDI, shifting to the FIDI Seaport Resiliency Plan, I just wanted to say that I'm so glad that you guys are taking a serious look at the full you know, East River coast there, including the FDR. It's, you know, my opinion that any serious resiliency project needs to reckon with the FDR because of the great expense. I think when the mayor initially proposed it, it was at $10 billion price tag, and the trouble of extending the East River into the East River for this project to include only climate adaptation, like adapting, like a passive measure, adapting to sea level rises, is insufficient. It needs to also include mitigation, which is, you know, addressing the underlying causes that's causing the seas to rise. We know the transportation sector accounts for 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in New York City. And by taking a hard look at whether we need the FDR, we need this big hulking urban highway separating the East River neighborhoods, East Side neighborhoods from the East River, would provide us an opportunity to look at, hey, can we decrease emissions in the transportation sector along the East Side? Would be, you know, enormously powerful and necessary, again, given the expense. Otherwise, I feel like we're going to be back here in 50 years talking about how much higher we need to rise or increase the East River or sorry, the walls that we're building or the barriers we're building. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for looking at that. It provides a glimmer of hope that the east side neighborhoods could have what the west side has with the Hudson River Park. Return access for the South Street Seaport, the historical importance of access to the waterfront. And again, if we're going to go to this expense of building this park or pier on the side, leaving this big purple behemoth is a big barrier for getting people to the water. So I just wanted to thank you guys for looking at that. I did want to ask, have you guys so from my anecdotal experience looking at traffic south on the FDR south of the Brooklyn Bridge, it seems like it's relatively underutilized. I know you guys looked at building a tunnel to replace the highway. My question is, have you gotten to the point where you're looking at transportation studies and traffic numbers where would South Street as it exists today be sufficient to handle the traffic should the FDR come down?
Excellent. So thanks, Michael, for the question. I will once again attempt to answer and then hand it off to people smarter than I. Yes, you are correct that the amount of traffic on that portion is certainly less than it is to the north. That said, there is some ambiguity in the future given congestion pricing and that being one of the untold portions. Who knows if that is kind of a temporary condition, if that's something that the legislature eventually amends. But that said, that's kind of an unknown. In terms of traffic studies, I will hand that to either Ronnie or Jocelyn to give a little update there.
And I can start. So we did look at whether the capacity on South Street alone is sufficient. And as Jordan mentioned, looking at both current capacity as well as potentially future capacity, we found that solely relying on South Street was insufficient. But we are looking at other types of opportunities to create a, say, more urban boulevard, smaller than West Side Highway, something closer to, say, a 3rd Avenue type of approach. So 2 lanes in each direction, a parking lane, a turning lane. So certainly a smaller footprint than exists today. But we are recommending as part of future work that a more serious study take on the traffic studies, how traffic would be rerouted should the FDR viaduct come down, and really answering all of the questions that you're putting forth right now, because we know it is so important to the future of Lower Manhattan, both the climate mitigation piece as well as the climate adaptation piece.
Great. Thanks so much, Ronnie and Jordan.
Sure.
Thanks very much. Great question. Okay, I think we've got Michael Kramer next.
All right, my first question is whether you're facing any funding deadlines.
So we are not facing any funding deadlines in the same way that, for example, the project to the north was, for folks that aren't familiar, the BMCR project was funded by HUD with a pretty challenging, to be honest, a funding deadline that required us to get congressional change to add an extra year. All of the funding related to FIDI and Seaport currently is from the city. Hopefully that's not always the case. And with the American Jobs Act coming together, the Bond Act, the State Bond Act that is potentially going to voters next year, I think it is reasonable to expect a project of this scale can't be supported entirely by the city and would benefit greatly from federal and state support, both of which could have funding deadlines. But once again, that infrastructure bill hasn't been, I don't think there's even a draft of the text out yet. So TBD, but no current deadlines.
All right, my next question is piggybacking on to Michael's question. Would it be possible to share the studies that you've done so far about taking down the FDR?
So certainly some of that work is what you'll be seeing moving forward. Some of that is expressed actually at the open house You kind of there a number of studies spatially will give you a sense of what it does and what it doesn't do. Moving forward into the fall, we'll likely be saying more. And I think to Ronnie's point, the kind of depth of work that really needs to be done to assess whether it's viable to take it down and replace it will likely need to be a future phase of work that the city could embark on.
But obviously the importance of making a decision about that impacts a lot of things, and to share it with the task force and with the community board would be very helpful. We talked about Reach C and Reach D. Did you resolve that yet? Combining Reach C and D?
So yeah, I guess for folks that aren't familiar, and I'm not sure if we showed a map of the different reaches, but we've in our design process split up the project area, running from the Battery up to the Brooklyn Bridge, A, B, C, D, and kind of different portions. It is not going to be split up from a kind of a functional standpoint. But it is merely, how we are talking about the kind of different project areas. Once again, VIDI is different than the Seaport, is different than the Battery. And so I think it's terminology that we use from a kind of how we talk about design, but not actually implications for the final project. I don't know, Ronnie, Jocelyn, other thoughts on this?
Just to say that I think it's Jordan, you explained that perfectly. And we definitely are taking the comment and making sure that what we are proposing across all of our reaches is really interconnected, and the relationship between what we would suggest in Reach C and Reach D speaks to one another. And we look forward to presenting much more of an integrated design across all of the reaches later this year.
Yeah, we just don't want to split up the historic district is what I'm trying to say. And then finally, one of your slides says that you're not a fan of building level approaches, and yet the new zoning talks about building level approaches. Now, how do we reconcile, the incongruity between what you're describing on the shoreline and what building owners might do with new construction?
So I think the way I would describe it is that, that is, for folks that aren't familiar, the new zoning code. I always mess up the zoning code for ZFCR, that is intended to be supportive of efforts of building owners to protect their buildings. I think what we're trying to say here is a building level only approach is something that we would never recommend for this project area. Not only does that put kind of the entire onus of protecting the coast on kind of individual building owners who may be building to a variety of different standards, kind of putting that pressure entirely on them. It also doesn't do anything to protect our streets, our piers, subway tunnels, kind of all the other assets that serve those buildings. So what we're saying is that is kind of an important effort. That is a citywide effort. There are areas where I think that matters more than others. We know that after Sandy, a number of building owners actually did elevate their mechanicals, put in, buy deployable measures. But what we're saying here is to truly solve a problem of this magnitude, we need coastal protection, and we need coastal protection that goes out into the water in certain spots.
Yeah, it's hard to justify, one size fits all for the entire city. And in the particular case of the Seaport Historic District, obviously even 12 feet in height makes a difference. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Yeah, and I think furthermore, the sort of challenges, protect a skyscraper versus a building in the Seaport. I think that kind of makes the difference even more clear, just because of the foundations, when those structures were constructed. Those are radically different approaches to protecting those different types of buildings. So
I'm referring to new construction, but yeah, I
Sure.
hear what you say. Okay, thank you, Alice.
Thanks very much, Michael. I think we've got, Gerald Forsberg.
Yeah, Jordan, where are the public meetings going to be held? And when you talked about the open house, are you referring to those meetings?
So we have had in-person pre-pandemic open houses. I think one of our, February 2019 had 300 people, 400 people gathered together. That's obviously not the moment to do something like that. So these will be online. If you go to FIDISeaportClimate.com, I believe.
Sorry.
What is it?
.nyc.
.nyc. I knew I wasn't going to nail that one. But yeah, so it's virtual, but we do our best to not make it a monotonous presentation. Bounce you around to different rooms. It should be somewhat entertaining.
And that's the June 28th and the June 30th public meetings? Okay.
Exactly. And I think it will make the sort of conversation that we're having today even make more sense. There are a number of kind of visual elements, new illustrations to kind of give you a sense of what we're thinking, and most importantly, your reactions and are we on the right track? Are we heading down the wrong path? I think we really want folks, I can't emphasize this enough, everyone here to tell your friends. I think we are only as good as hearing the number of different voices on this issue.
Yeah, on that point, Jordan, I guess there was some expectation that some of those plans that were shared with the Climate Coalition last week would be shared tonight, and that we could get down to some of those responses to those very questions as to what the community wants to see and the like. So will there be another opportunity at the community board level, or do we assume that this will only happen at the open house level to have those exchanges about next steps?
I do believe that the open house is kind of, once again, we're here at 8:30. I don't know how fulsome of a conversation we could have on the illustrations. Wanted to cover the kind of on-land constraints and other things. And so I think it'll be a much better venue to have the conversation next week. That said, this is a big immersive project. We know you have a lot of questions. We'll be back to the community board.
Good to hear. Thanks a lot. Okay, Rosa Chang.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you guys so much for your really clear explanation of the analyses that you did and your conclusions. I think that's very helpful to us to wrap our minds around what we have to deal with for the next, well, it sounds like decades, honestly. So I had a few questions. Number one, you were talking about why one of the challenges about doing this exclusively on land was the infrastructure underground. Wouldn't that infrastructure underground also be an issue once you get off land? Doesn't some of that infrastructure extend underneath the water as well? And how do you deal with that? So I guess that's question number one.
So there's certainly some infrastructure that extends out into the water, the subway tunnels being one of the most critical ones. We are looking pretty extensively at what sort of measures you need to do to kind of bridge over those tunnels. It's not easy and it's not inexpensive, but it's a challenge. But there are significantly fewer overall because it's in the water, right? There are the interceptor that services the kind of wastewater, stormwater for Lower Manhattan runs through that area. Kind of number of electrical, fire-related services. Not to mention, they're old and the locations may be clear in certain areas, but less clear in others. So very clearly, there are pretty significant benefits, in kind of building a kind of a new structure that doesn't deal with it kind of as many conflicts. But Joe, do you want to add a little bit more to that one?
I'll just kind of summarize what you said because I thought it was a good point. It's not that we're avoiding it, but we're lessening it. There's less less to deal with, not zero.
Right. Right. Understood. Okay, question number 2 is, what is the estimate? I know you guys are in the very, very beginning phases, and that this is an unfair question given that, but what's your estimated and not optimistic but more realistic timeline for the design and the start and completion of this kind of project?
This
When
one,
will we be able to say, so when will we be able to feel some sense of security and protection against constant flooding or the threat of a severe event?
This one I will give to Jocelyn. I know she was maybe away from the computer for a bit, but if she is near, want to take a first pass on that one, Jocelyn?
Jocelyn, you're on mute.
You might need to repeat the end of the question.
What is a realistic estimated timeline for the start and completion of construction of this project?
I think that we'll have to come back to you with a more realistic answer. A lot depends on the permitting, environmental review, and all of the approvals that will be needed to get to a start date with something this complex of going into the water. It can take many years to get through full approval process, which will be starting post this master planning effort. And then in terms of construction, that will be dependent on the phasing as well as the funding for the project and timeline of funding becoming available, as well as having. So ultimately it could take decades. Of course, we hope to be able to advance it sooner. We're really excited about the infrastructure bill and potential for federal funding. And we also are excited about where we are right now with the design and getting community feedback and where we can get by the end of this year to have a conceptual design, with community feedback and regulatory feedback, which is really important, and support to advance this forward as quickly as possible. But yeah, ultimately, we see how long projects have taken, like the Authorities project or the BMCR project, and those don't involve this very complex, permitting for in-water structures. And we still don't know our funding, so I don't want to falsely promise anything more ambitious than at least a couple of decades.
Okay, thank you. I have to just say that personally, I'm just so excited that we are starting to really look at this seriously and come to some sort of a design and solution to this incredibly, potentially devastating problem that we have here in our neighborhood. And to me, the choice is, super clear. It's either we protect our communities or we flood. And if we flood, then we don't have our communities for much longer. So to me, it's a basic necessity for the survival of our neighborhoods. So I've actually sat in on a lot of these meetings that you guys have hosted, and they're great, and I've learned a lot, and I look forward to sitting in on more of them. I was wondering, when you look at the design of the sort of in the water version, and you're building out and you're also building higher, is the plan actually to, as you're showing, to sort of infill sort of behind you towards the city, or are you, while you're spending all of these billions of dollars to do this, are you looking at also building something into the sort of the reach out into the water, so something that actually utilizes a space rather than just being infill? And I'm thinking specifically of things that could be emptied out if necessary, so like parking space, like maybe we could finally get all of the police cars off of our street and into behind that retaining wall, or DOT parking or other things like that, but some sort of usage that would make it more efficient to have spent that money for this effort. by, killing 2 or 3 birds with one stone. And I know that there's also, been concern in the past that's been expressed in our committee about, what are you going to do with that land? Because I know you're showing us these beautiful parkland spaces potentially that would happen there. But I know that there's also been talk of, whether some of it would become actually, built into buildings that are privately owned and how that would work. And I think that if you could also address both of those points, I think that would be helpful as well, please.
I think you make an excellent, of course, by building this flood protection infrastructure, right, and not, putting a straight wall at the waterfront, which I think all of us can agree, would not be a good condition. By building it out, creating that waterfront access, ensuring that, to our maritime uses, we are creating space. And we need to figure out how we will use that space. And that is the conversation, that we're engaging in right now across different stakeholder meetings, and which we'll delve into much more deeply at the public meeting as well. I think, in that space, we know there are things that we have to achieve. We need to have our pathways. We need to have access. We need to be able to get to the waterfront and access our maritime uses. You need queuing. You need space for expanded ferry service in the future, and all of those things. At the same time, there are the spaces in between, and that can be used for a multitude of different uses, from thinking about different types of programming, playgrounds, of course, replacing at minimum, the esplanade that's there today, but also other types of open space and parks programming, as you have noted, as well as the potential to have buildings. There are many buildings that exist along this waterfront today. You have industry campuses, right? You have different amenities that are located along the waterfront. You have all of Pier 17. You have, what's built up around Pier 15. So, there are a number of different types of built form today. And I think that, buildings can play potentially an important role in amenities, as well as helping to navigate the space and the grade change that we're dealing with, and to activate the site and have eyes on the street. And lastly, buildings can also play potentially helping with project financing. We know that there is not a bullet solution, and that development will not fund the entirety of the project. We want to ensure that we are looking at any potential role in development in a very sensitive way to the existing context. That it's not impeding the open space, the access, and all of the other uses. And most importantly, that it is not driving us out into the water any further. And this is absolutely critical from a regulatory perspective, as well as, what we've heard from the community, that every inch we are going out in the water is to site our coastal defense infrastructure, have public access and maritime uses. But, with that remaining space, there may be space for these buildings and can help potentially fund the project. We shared that information at the last Climate Coalition meeting. We think there's a range potentially that development could help finance, from just, a few hundred thousand, a few hundred dollars to, potentially over $1 billion, depending on the types of uses that you put in this space. And, that analysis was done assuming everything we've heard from the public so far, of really having very, very limited potential development in the South Street Seaport Historic District, in line with the current character and height limitations of a maximum of 5 stories. And then looking, to the south of a few potential places where some buildings may go, which could be taller. We're really at the stage of collecting feedback on all of this. What do people want to see in terms of open space, amenities, maritime access, buildings, and all of these different programmatic opportunities, and understanding what people don't want to see as well. Making sure all of that feedback is incorporated into the plan.
Will that analysis, Jocelyn, that you provided to the Climate Coalition be provided at this open house that you're describing that had been seen by the coalition?
Yes, we plan to share.
Okay.
Very
And
similar material.
Like the plan that shows the building pads all along the coast and what the scale of those are, and if if I could just make a request that those dimensions are really clear as to you have dimensions on some of those plans, are just to be really clear as to, width, depth, and height. It was a little bit unclear when I originally saw them. Just a point to further clarify what Rosa was asking for. Okay, Rosa, I didn't mean to interrupt. Did you finish your
That's all right.
questions?
No, sorry. Have a couple more. So I guess just based on what you said, I just want to say that for me, my personal preference, I think is that that the edge along the waterfront be left public and be left clear of buildings as much as possible, and be left open for public enjoyment and community engagement and activity and recreation, because along the entire east side of our city down here, we just don't have that much public recreation space. In fact, we have like next to none. And I think we all, love what's happening on the west side and what has happened on the west side. And I do think that, I've spent a lot of time in Battery Park City, and the buildings sort of set inwards, and the land and the open space and public recreation and enjoyment and utilization happening waterside is incredibly important. And I hope that that when you're looking at it, I don't know what the PAD plan is that Alice referred to, but I really do hope that you seriously but you deliver a public green perimeter that's fully utilized for communities, for our community specifically. And then as relates to that sort of I am actually in support of the removal of the FDR south of the Brooklyn Bridge. I think that would offer many benefits to our community, but I also think that might free up, especially more in the FIDI, definitely not in the Seaport area, an opportunity to build, if you must do so, specifically for financing for the project, that doesn't impact the public enjoyment of the water's edge. And then I think hopefully lastly, I like, as soon as I saw your switchback diagrams for the access up to the upper edge of the infrastructure, I just immediately recalled Arthur Erickson's building, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what it is. He's a Canadian architect. Maybe I can find it and send it to you. But I think that there are ways to make it very efficient and yet still provide full access, ADA access across to a higher elevation, and then therefore leaving much more open space to be utilized fully for recreation, passive or active. I think that's it for now. And
Thanks
plus,
very much.
I would love to see the spaghetti, on ramps and off ramps leading to the FDR disappear, because I think it is a huge blight to our neighborhood, and it's a huge disconnector. And it would be really amazing to have like an actual welcoming swath of land that connects us past the Brooklyn Bridge, which is sort of a passion project of mine. But
thanks, Rosa.
Thank you.
All right. Wendy Chapman.
This is just a point of clarification or question. In the earlier meeting a couple days ago, the thought was the FDR would be buried, not just eliminated, because what I heard tonight is people want it just eliminated to reduce traffic. Is that a point of clarification that you all could share, whether it's the option is buried versus eliminate? And then one more plug for the Plus Pool to come in our neighborhood to put on the end of Rosa's comments about lack of amenities in Community Board 1. We do not have a public pool, and where it's slated to go right now, they have 3. So that's just another request that I bring up often. Thank you.
So on the FDR issue, to be clear, we did look, and then that was shown in a prior slide, some options of burying either in a trough or another form. And it was our conclusion, not only would that be wildly expensive, lead to conflicts with a lot of those utilities that we mentioned. So it is not something that we are currently looking at. Want to be very clear that, we don't think, just elimination and using South Street is an option either. I think we all want to move to a future with kind of fewer vehicles, fewer private automobiles. But I think that we don't want to lead to kind of solve one problem and create others. So what is being investigated, at least in the kind of earlier stages, is a kind of a boulevard, a bit of an expansion of South Street, not trying to recreate the West Side Highway, which I think has its own set of issues, but something that solves problems.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to ask, in the interest of time, as we're coming in on 9 o'clock, that committee members who've already asked their questions kind of hold back for the public open house just in a week, only a week away. So with that, we haven't heard yet from Bob Schneck and Richard Corman. So Bob, do you want to ask your question? Thanks.
Okay, I just wanted to these are concerns that I have of the whole project. The first one is that the pandemic caused an awful lot of changes in the city. And we're by far not the city we were a couple of years ago. And so I think the economics and even the structure of the city are going to be changing. And I think once the eviction moratorium and some of the other protections dissipate, we're going to be having another kind of set of circumstances. So I think all these projects have to really be considered in the light of the new circumstances and of the new economics and even structure of how downtown is going to work, because I don't think we're going to be the financial center of the world that we were coming out of this. We're going to have to do some reinventing. So the real issue is building back better, I think. The next thing, I just have a list of things that I've thought of that seem important. The next thing is really the importance of expediting HATS. I think it's really important to have integrated planning on a large scale, and that it's important to include the tributaries and the harbor in that consideration. And the only major large bore study that was underway like that was HATS. And I think everyone, the community board and your group, should really do what we can to expedite that getting done, so we have as wide a picture as possible. And one of the things that affects, which was being thought about earlier, was the design elevation. I think as more time passes, there's a better chance of understanding what's happening with sea level rise in particular. And I think the Army Corps is in a good position to help educate the public on how that works. The next thing I was thinking about is how the East River, if we have the new solution that you showed us today for Lower Manhattan, that really seems like it's something that you could have in the East River Park area, because the idea of filling shutting off that park for half a decade or a decade, filling it with earth, and then in order to produce some height, I think just adding some of the solution you have just adds a little bit of space onto the island, rather than making a huge change like that. So I was wondering if that could be explored, and that the east side and west side of Manhattan there probably are ways to integrate these projects. Often I see that you will have two projects, one emphasizing sea level rise and the other one emphasizing storm surge, and they don't come together. And that problem of how we balance the two kinds of protections, often I think is something that I notice being out of balance. as you work on these things, over by Pier A, we are going to have all the protections behind Pier A, so we're essentially sacrificing Pier A. So I'm concerned about the piers that we have already and how those are going to be protected, or how we factor in their loss or protection into these projects. This also, an important thing that's been going on for years is, if we're really considering big moves like removing the FDR, we really have to think about improved infrastructure for the whole downtown, especially for transportation, because if we're going to remove large arteries, then we have to replace the service of those large arteries. And we really have to think about that. I'm interested in how the sewage infrastructure would change. So you could help educate us on, kind of what that looks like and how it works. And then people have been talking a little bit about mitigation, and I'm interested in how this project works with mitigation. That's all those questions are much more than we can go over now. But all these things seem to me concerns, including the cost and timeline of this, which is, at least often it's been argued that the Army Corps of Engineers is so slow that there's no point even completing HATS. The fact is that projects like this one are going to take a long, long time. They're going to take a decade or more, or two. And so we should really carefully educate the public about the cost and timing of these things, so that we have a feel for what's happening, because every day we do nothing, we're exposed to risk. Another Sandy, another bigger and more violent natural catastrophe. So
Bob, I
just a
can
list
jump
of
in.
ideas.
Yeah,
I'm
I'll cherry pick my favorite ones of yours, and the difficult ones I'll leave for someone else. Now, I appreciate all your points. Certainly on HATS and getting that restarted, we believe that's important work. It's similar to what other folks talked about, issues of zoning. None of these efforts, I think it's always our view that they do work in conjunction. You kind of learn more in the process. It is kind of critical work, and so we are advocating to the extent that the community board can be another voice in that conversation. I think that's important. Pier A, I know that's come up in the past, and there has been work on that building in terms of some flood-proofing effort. The challenge is that it is very difficult to build these kind of massive flood protection on pier structures. So realistically, there will be moments where kind of certain buildings built at the edge, will likely have to be kind of beyond, behind or in front of the level of protection. That's something that we kind of deal with across the city. And then, to your drainage point, I think it came up in the presentation. The FIDI Seaport project, as it stands, it is looking at kind of an intervention kind of on the scale of a pump station. There's also kind of very close coordination that mentioned before that PPCA is working with our office and with DEP to come up with a kind of a solution for their work. That's obviously on kind of a different time scale, and the needs to get accredited, that process to go through the FEMA process is different than the work in FIDI Seaport, but complementary also. So I think those were a few of the things you raised, and I'm happy to get to the other ones offline.
Thanks very much, Jordan. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was the last hand up. Just after 9, thankfully, we can call it over the meeting, I think, unless anybody else appears. No. I just want to thank everyone very, very much, the presenters and, of course, the committee members and the public for hanging in and listening to what is obviously a very beginning conversation on this. Encourage everyone to please, if they have opinions on the HRPT estuarine management plan, to write Diana, who has left her email identifier there in the chat, I think. And for this, the FIDI Seaport plans to please attend the open house on June 28th or June 30th. And that is in our newsletter and will continue to be so. We'll mention it again at the full board tomorrow and such. So I think without further ado, I'll thank you again and say good night to all. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alice. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night,
Good
Alice.
night.
Good night, everybody.
Right, thanks.
Hi, Alice. I didn't raise my hand and I have a ton of questions, but because I'm not on the committee, I didn't know. But
Francis, let's make sure that that's no reason not to ask them. Of course, you are. So please come to the meeting on the 30th and ask away and feel free, to please put them also in email and I'll make sure that we get the answers. So please go ahead.
Yeah, because it basically, because I have no technical questions to ask. Mine is the opposite side. Does it look nice? You ask me if it looks nice, and I'll tell you if it looks nice. But in terms of if it's structurally done and all those other things, I have no clue about that. And in particular, between Fulton Street and the Manhattan Bridge, it's hard. Anyway.
All right. Well, unfortunately, I did close out the meeting, so I'm afraid we'll have to take
quiet. I sat quiet, and I'll speak up next time because I do.
Oh, excellent! I
do have
encourage you to do that, and everyone,
especially with 250 Water Street and the drainage. A whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, big questions that absolutely have to be answered. Thanks again, Francis.
Thank you. Good night. Good luck tomorrow. Yes.